kind of an odd mixture of forces. That's the explanation as to why. Let's go up to number 1. Kind of an odd mixture of forces. That's the explanation as to why. Let's go up to number 1. That's the explanation as to why. Let's kind of an odd mixture of forces. That's the explanation as to why. Let's go up to number 1. To be like Jesus, to ressembler Jésus. Kind of an odd mixture of forces. That's kind of an odd mixture of forces. That's the explanation as to why. Let's go up to number 1. Kind of an odd mixture of forces. That's the explanation as to why. Let's go up to number 1. To be like Jesus, to ressembler Jésus. 8. I'd love to sing more, but we'll be singing some more off the sheet later on. In just a few moments, I believe Major Ray Smith's going to come up and pray with us. And before he does, we'll sing one more chorus, number 2, just to sort of bring us into an attitude of prayer and gain a perspective on the Lord. I trust that this is the testimony of each of us here this evening, that Jesus is our Lord. And when we pray to Him and talk to Him, we talk to Him with this relationship in mind. Jésus-Christ est Seigneur. Let's sing it together, and then Major Smith will come and pray with us.
Team. It's a large team. You don't realize how large it is till you stand up here and you realize that this is actually just a small segment of the total correctional population. But it's nice to have you here, and we trust that the Lord's blessing will be upon us as we meet in Christian fellowship, and that we will receive some instruction and enlightenment that will help us in our ministry. I was sharing with some of the officers earlier, one or two of them, saying that corrections is a rather strange department. We never have to goad people into activity. We don't need to really push anybody to work. The only thing we have to do is to put reins on them and try and hold them back, because I know that most of you have your way. You'd be running off in all directions and doing programs and establishing new contracts. We wouldn't be able to keep up with them or regularize them, but it's a good sign and it's a healthy sign, and we're very happy that we have that type of people in the department. And we do commend you for the very fine ministry that you're performing, for the hundreds of thousands of lives you're touching every week. People who are hurting and people who need someone who cares and someone who has a healing message to come to them. And we thank you that you are those who are bringing that healing message. I thought we would introduce to you in this evening's service some of those who are in special places of responsibility in the Correctional Services Department, so you would get to know them. I'm putting my paper out here because I'm getting old now and my memory fails me at times. First of all, we will introduce to you the national coordinators, those who are responsible for coordination of certain types of ministry and who are related to our national office. And I'm going to ask them to stand, and possibly in one or two cases they might just give a very brief synopsis of what they're involved in, and you'll be able to welcome them and get to know who they are. First of all, we have the National Coordinator for Staff Training and Development, Major Joan Lawler. Joan, please. Let's give her a hand, John. I think her title very clearly designates her responsibility. Then we have the National Coordinator for Ministries to Women in Corrections, Mrs. Donna Howell. Major Howell, where are you? Way back here. I don't really want to say a word, Donna, what your...
I think everybody has received a copy of the job description, and I think probably the best way that I can perhaps summarize what I've been trying to do in the last little while is that of building bridges, that of trying to do a PR job with others who are involved in the same types of services that we are. And and I'm just thankful for the doors that are beginning to open and that I believe will continue to open.
John is doing an excellent job. I think we ought to acknowledge her. We have our man in Ottawa. It's not Brian Mulrooney, but it's our national representative, Major David Howell, and I think most of us are quite familiar with the Major's responsibility, and I guess he's sitting back here. Let's give the Major a hand. He liaises with the federal government and has been doing a great deal with regard to representing us in national associations and also making representations to the government for all types of assistance, funding and otherwise. And we do appreciate very much the many, many hours of extra labor that the Major puts in. And finally, our National Coordinator for Volunteers, Mrs. Major Jean Moulton, who works in our office, doing a tremendous job there. This is Captain Jean Moulton. No, thank you.
I would like to say a special welcome to the volunteers who are delegated here at the conference. Two in particular who have been chosen to represent volunteers across the country. Mrs. Connie Willischuk from Ottawa, would you like to say anything? And Mr. Robert Lee from Amherst, Nova Scotia. And we welcome these and other volunteers who have been able to join us.
Thank you very much. Let's give our welcome. And we also have our regional coordinators present. As you know, there are regional coordinators who are responsible through our office to help our administration in reaching into the various regions of the country. I'm just trying to ask them to stand quickly, not to make any speeches, but we will recognize them. Major Bob Allen from the Atlantic Provinces region. Captain Kenneth Winger from Quebec. Major Fred Mills, Eastern Ontario. Captain Joe Lawler, Western Ontario. Some important ranks, all right. Captain David Moulton, Central Region. Captain Douglas Hill from the Prairie Region and Northwest Territories. And Major Fred Jackson from the Pacific, the your regional coordinators, and I know from the reports I received that they are doing a very fine ministry. I was recently to a retreat that Major Allen conducted, established down in New Brunswick at Scotian Glen. We had a marvelous time of spiritual refreshment, and we hear from all the regions of great things that are happening, and we do pray that God's blessing may continue to be upon that particular area of ministry. Now we have some special guests here, and I'm going to ask Captain David Moulton to come and just introduce some of the special guests who are with us here this evening.
Thank you very much, and I would like to just make a note, some of our special guests who are going to be arriving to do the various workshops, some have arrived already, so we would like to acknowledge their presence with us, and then the others, as they do arrive in the next couple of days, we will be introducing them. But we want to just give a brief welcome, and some of them will be giving a more lengthy introduction at the actual workshops. But I'd like to start with Dr. Frank Wakely. Dr. Frank. Dr. Wakely is from Buffalo, New York, and is the Salvation Army in charge of the social services there in Buffalo. And we've been pleased that his wife Pat and their two children, David and Jean, have been able to join with him here for this conference. We also have Reverend and Mrs. Tom Beckner. Tom's wife Bev is along with him as well. I'd like to stand here. And Reverend and Mrs. Beckner are all the way from Atlanta, Georgia. And they're here. Reverend Beckner is going to be doing the workshop on chaplaincy, and I know it'll be an interesting one. And I should say that Dr. Frank Wakely will be doing the workshop on the program evaluation, which again I think is going to be an interesting area, an area that we need to be delving into a little more and to looking at in a little more depth. A couple other guests. One is a person who really has become part of us over the last little while, and that's Judge Don Luther from from Corner Brook, Newfoundland. And Judge Luther is a provincial court judge there in that great land of Newfoundland, great homeland for many of us. And we do welcome him and his support through the last couple of years, especially on our Territorial Advisory Council on Corrections. And John is going to be the moderator. We're going to work him hard because he's come such a long distance. He's going to be moderating 2 workshops, the young offender as well as the sentencing workshop that Judge Langman is going to be presenting. And the last guest that we'd like to introduce is a special guest all the way from London. That's London, Ontario, not London, England. And this gentleman is the area manager for Correctional Services of Canada in London, has been there for a number of years. And I know when my wife and I were there, we had the joy of working with him. And now Major Joan Lawler, of course, has that opportunity. And the person I'm referring to is Mr. Pat Wood. And Pat's at the back, already standing. You have to meet. And Pat very kindly, when he realized we were in need of an official photographer and someone to run the video who knew what they were doing, when he spoke with Major Lawler last week, very kindly offered, and his district director allowed him permission to be here for the whole of the conference. And we really are pleased that you're here, Pat, and we look forward to having time of fellowship as well as the seeing you behind the camera every once in a while. So if you see him around, you'll know who he is. So those are our guests at the moment, and others will be arriving. So we're looking forward to a good conference. I should just say, as the program chairman, that I really am pleased and have been pleased with the response that we had, both from presenters as we contacted them, as well as moderators. And we're pleased the fact that we've been able to we've tried to get representation across the country. We've even, as you can see, brought in some guests from the United States to make this even have an international flavor in that sense. And I've been pleased with the response of these people and their willingness and the quality of the individuals and the workshops that they're going to be presenting. And so I'm really pleased and would like to say a word publicly of thanks to each one of them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we're looking forward to a great time these next few days. Now we're going to ask at this time Major and Mrs. Harold Duffett, who are from that very busy correctional center in Guelph. They're going to lead us in our responsive scripture reading.
I hope you all have a copy of the scripture that we're going to read. It should be somewhere tucked away in your little red pouch, so you can find it. We're going to do it a little different this evening. My wife is going to read the first portion, and the ladies will respond by reading the dark print. I'll read the next one, and the men will respond by reading the dark print. So in that order, we'll read the scripture. Would you stand, please?
very interesting and unusual doors in my life, and I thank him and praise him for that. When I look back to serving him in Montreal as an officer and the opportunities that were there, I thought, this is fantastic, it's great, you know, most of the time I thought that. And I wondered really, Lord, where is it all leading? What's the future hold? But trusted him, and he was marvelous and kept his word that he would lead and guide if he was first in my life. The doors have since opened up to become married, to serve the Lord with a partner. And I thank God for that, because I know that's what he wanted for my life. And then this great big wide door has opened into the Yukon Territory that has offered the opportunity now to serve him in correctional services. And really at this moment I'm still overwhelmed by the whole opportunity. I'm overwhelmed by the job, I'm overwhelmed by the whole spectrum that's there of service. It's a new work in the Yukon, the only one of its kind in the Yukon, so that has its advantages. It has its disadvantages, but there's no comparison. This is the way the Lord is working and leading, and it's exciting to be a part of that, in a sense, pioneering for the work in that area. I think what the ministry means to me is a continuation of a ministry that God gives every Christian, and that is basically that wherever we are, God can use us. Whether we're serving Him in the job He's appointed us to, whatever that is, I know that there's a ministry involved if we'll look at it in that way. And I think what I try to get across in what I'm doing is to somehow afford the same opportunity to other people that God has given me. How many times have I failed God and asked for forgiveness, and He's been there? How many times has He opened up His arms of love and taken me in when I really didn't deserve to have that love expressed? Somehow to express that to those people that the Lord puts in my path. The particular work I'm doing now is I'm working with my husband together in the adult residential center where we have 10 residents coming in, well, a maximum of 10. We have 8. Tomorrow we'll have 8 in the house. And the opportunities are there. Living in a situation, and those of you who are in residential programs know that it's quite a different thing. You're there when people are sitting down together at meals, when they go off to bed, when they get up in the morning, when all kinds of situations. And there's no hiding. There's no hiding who you are, because when you're there, you are part of the family. And I believe that God really can use and work in that ministry. So it's very new to me, and I'm very new to it, but I do know, as I say, I want to somehow afford the opportunity to someone else. And so that God is a loving and forgiving God. And because He sent it for me, I want to try somehow to express that to you and to see Christ in each one. So I pray and trust that God will continue leading, as I know He will. And thank you.
Thank you so much. It's nice to hear those words. And you know,
we in Windsor are not part of the National Corrections Program, and it becomes quite overwhelming when we have the opportunity to attend a convention of this sort. The first one I attended was 4 years ago, and we had no guidance in Windsor whatsoever as to where the corrections work was to go. And what we did was, there was only 2 of us, and in fact, both of us were only part-time. And we looked at the needs And we looked at Scripture, and we went with what our heart said. And after a year and a half of that, we were able to come up and attend this conference. And lo and behold, everything that we were doing was basically the same things that everyone here tonight is doing. And we thought about it afterwards, and there was quite a perk to that, in that we felt, for sure, we were divinely led. The Lord had shown us the need, and that the people were there. The harvest was full. And we have been now 6 years working corrections in Windsor as a department, with a staff of now 2.5. A very efficient department, I feel. I might be a little biased when I say that. But when I look at the work we have done, the individuals that we have touched, and the lives that have changed through our presence, and through the guidance of the Lord, I'm quite thankful. There's a verse in Scripture I'd like to share with you. I'm sure you all know it. There's, I believe, 100 references to prison in Scripture. This is from Hebrews, 13th chapter, 3rd verse. Remember those in prison as if you were their fellow prisoners, and those who are mistreated as if you yourselves are suffering. That's a whole message in itself. That's a whole mission statement for all of us. Many times the prison that we're dealing with is not those four walls of concrete and steel, but actually a prison put up by society, of which we are part. From time to time we are guilty, or society is guilty, of setting up a prison to those that are within it. It's all too unfortunate that many of the individuals that we deal with are lacking the social graces and social skills to achieve integration into society, and with society. And I think many times, society for sure, and I think we have that same fault, that we forget the potential of the individuals that we're working with. The potential to be one of God's children. We, and we alone, have that awesome responsibility to bring the Word of God to all peoples. All those who seem to be lacking in the knowledge or the understanding or the wherewithal or the past environment they came from that is against what we're looking at or what we're trying to do. But it's important for us to knock down those prison walls, closed-mindedness. We have a responsibility. And many lives can be and are saved through our work. And how easy it is that we forget through the days. Heather started out by saying, the day I received the letter of the call was not a good day for testimony. We all have those days. There's a lot of those days in a year. But within those days, there's hours, sometimes only minutes. Real glory, where we see a change in an individual, and we've been part of it. It's an awesome responsibility. Many times we forget it. I know I have to remind myself from time to time, what is it I'm doing here? What seems so futile? And then I remember, God challenged me. He felt this is the work I should do. And he felt there was a reason. And with that, we go forward as Christ with us. And we make those changes.
Thank you so much.
This
uniform. We have two officers here. One actually should have received a special award 3 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, but for some reason it was not presented at that time. I think it's nice that both husband and wife should now come and be presented with their 35-year star for 35 years of continuous service as Salvation Army officers. Now, one of these has actually done 37 or 38 years, I'm not quite sure. It's pretty close to that, but I think that it is very nice that they have decided, and we have decided that on this occasion, when we are here as a department, we should present these special awards to Major Mrs. Fred Mills for these years of service. Now, some of you think that 5 years is a lot, or 10 years, or 15 years. Mark here, if he thinks of 15 years out of a 9, he'll be a gray-haired man if he's still going after that, I don't know. Some of the others, 15, 20, 30, 35 years. It's a pretty big part of your life. And 35 years as Salvation Army officers is quite an accomplishment. We'd like Fred and Doris, Fred and Dory to come now and receive these awards at this time. Let's give them a real hand because we're very happy to be able to present that in front of the other members of the team here this evening. Now, last Wednesday was a very significant day for one of our members, one of the members of the Correctional Services Department, in that he was called to Government House in Ottawa and was invested as a member of the Order of Canada. A very high and signal honor, and I think we ought to ask Major Reimer-Smith to stand. We want to show to him how proud we are of this. I would like to have been there, but I found out they only allowed one guest, and that was his wife, and I couldn't ask her to sort of give up her place for me. I would like to have been present, but I believe it was a very auspicious occasion, and perhaps the Major may share with you personally something of that experience of having the Governor General place the medal on him and the honor that goes with it. And we do indeed very greatly honor you for all that you've done. I said that Mrs. Smith likely had a lot to do with it, but she didn't get the medal, he got the medal. And behind every successful man, there's a wife that keeps pushing him. So anyhow, we do, though, pass on our very sincere congratulations on that very high honor. Now we're going to ask Major Webster, who is, as you know, the Assistant Secretary for Correctional Services, to bring us a gospel solo this time.
We've been here since Friday. There was some penance. We were asked to come and share with the Tobico Temple band and songsters in their retreat. We soldier at that corps, and we were asked to come and share with them. We had a lovely service here this morning. It was just very, very warm and very lovely. It's kind of a study in contrasts from that to this, and yet it's wonderful how God can use all that we do for His honor and glory. And we're singing a song that's now included in the new songbook, only in the American section at the back, with due apologies for our American friends, but they add a few songs to it. But I love this song. It's called Spirit of God, Descend Upon My Heart.
All
very much. Beautiful message and song. Well, we're very happy and very proud to have with us to bring our keynote for this very significant Sunday evening service. None other but our territorial field secretary for personnel, the person of Colonel Lloyd Calvert. The Colonel has had quite a distinguished career, as most of the Salvation Army officers here will know. He has served in many prominent positions in the Salvation Army. He was the Territorial Youth Secretary, he was the Division Commander for British Columbia, he was the Field Secretary for Program, and now he's Field Secretary for Personnel. He's held many other, as you know, positions in the National Information Service. Special Efforts Department for quite a lengthy period of time, plus Corps appointments and various other appointments in youth and other related departments. He's here to bring us our keynote for this evening. He just got back from England last night. I thought he was coming in this morning. I thought he wouldn't be awake for tonight, but he got in last night and he phoned me up about 9 o'clock or so. So he's had a little opportunity to rest after quite a holiday over on the other side. We're glad to have him here tonight. And I want you to welcome Colonel Calvert as he comes out and brings us.
Well, young people have a word to describe moments like this. It's the word awesome. It's awesome to sit on this platform and compute what it represents in service in this room tonight. For if we could do it chronologically, we would discover that the sum total would take us back prior to the days of Christ. That's how much service is represented in this room tonight. And that's awesome. But I think more importantly than the chronological service that's represented is what hits me as I look at you as individuals and recognize that you are simply representative of a whole world of influence. And when I start to compute that impact upon community and society, the word is not out of place, it's awesome. And it's with a real sense of privilege that I stand here tonight. First of all, positionally. For because of who I am at this moment, and it's only because I'm appointed that I can claim that positional privilege. I can first of all bring you greetings from Commissioner Mrs. Pratt and Colonel Mrs. Waters, and with the greetings to extend on their behalf a sincere expression of appreciation for who you are and what you are doing in the name of Christ. This is a remarkable territory. I doubt that any territory in the world has the geographical dimensions that Canada and Bermuda enjoys. Last Sunday, Ruth and I attended a service at Harrow Corps in England where Captain and Mrs. Junior Hines were stationed. And someone in the Corps was sort of commiserating with them that they were so far away from home. Their home is Newfoundland. And they said, do you realize that we could receive an appointment in our own territory that would be further than the distance from Newfoundland to England? That's awesome. But that's the kind of geography that we represent in this territory. And certainly anybody who travels internationally comes into an appreciation of the distinctives of the correctional services in this territory in comparison with other territories in the world. It is unique, and it is looked at with envy. It's highly developed, and you are part of it. You helped make it what it is. But it's also awesome to me from a personal point of view. Because within one circle of friends, and sometimes even within the family circle, you meet individuals who in fact become the recipients of what you are doing. And that closeness of affinity makes you acutely sensitive as to what it represents to have someone who will become your advocate. Someone who will facilitate the very simple things that are needed, such as communication with family. someone who will in fact listen. And I share that awareness with deep appreciation tonight for all that is represented here. You will know that the month of November in the Salvation Army is a very unique month. For 100 years ago this month, that conversation took place between William Booth and his son Bramwell concerning the problems of men sleeping under the bridges in London. And you will know that William Booth said to Bramwell, "Are you aware that men are sleeping under the bridges?" And when he acknowledged, yes, he was aware, so came those very famous words, "Well then, do something. Do something." And it's significant that your conference is scheduled in that 100-year anniversary of that very, very important utterance that marks so much of the social concerns expressed through the Salvation Army. There are few departments in this territory who have expanded as rapidly as correctional services or achieved the visibility that you have. And with that comes experience and the pain of rapid development and some of the attending agonies. Tonight I'm going to be so bold as to look at this transition. I would like to look at it reflectively tonight, at the past. I would like to look at it analytically as we think of the present. And I would like to look at it prophetically as we think of the future. For we've come a long way since the concept of the prison gate ministry. You will know that Newton's law of theory says that a body will continue to move in a given direction until some force of greater strength interacts with that body and causes it to change direction. I tend to think that is where we find ourselves in corrections in this territory at this moment. There is a momentum that comes out of the past. A momentum that some would dearly love to change. I recall reading in Time magazine the comment that sin is not what it used to be, but the Salvation Army is. And whoever made that statement was speaking with a wisdom that we need to pay attention to. In this keynote tonight, I not only want to be provocative in thought, but I do want to say something that will contribute towards your spiritual consideration organizationally. The system in which we work, the Salvation Army, is not God. But God is in the system. One of the profound things that you begin to realize in life as you work within the Army system is that the only vehicle that God has of accomplishing his purpose is the human mind, the human heart, and the human hand. And we need to sense that afresh, that God is operative within the system. It is not the system that is God. And discover within that system and his expression what is his will. Certainly when you take the Word of God, you cannot escape the strong sense of identity that Jesus has with this whole concept of justice. Let me read to you from the 42nd chapter of the book of Isaiah. Speaking prophetically, "Here is my servant, whom I uphold, my chosen one in whom I delight. I will put my spirit on him, and he will bring justice to the nations. He will not shout or cry out, or raise his voice in the streets. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. in faithfulness, he will bring forth justice. He will not falter or be discouraged till he establishes justice on earth. In his laws, the islands will put their hopes. That's the vision of the prophet, of the coming of Christ. That is the hope of a people who were oppressed. That was the anticipation of what could yet be by God's will and God's grace. And then you turn to the New Testament, and you encounter Jesus returning to his hometown in Nazareth and entering into the synagogue on the Sabbath day. And he takes the scroll from the prophet Isaiah. He unrolls it. He finds the place where it is written. And this is what he says. The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to release the oppressed, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. Tonight, we meet in this room with a conscious awareness of his presence here. May our prayer be that that Spirit that rested upon him will rest upon us. And may our minds and our hearts and our hands demonstrate the fulfillment of that hope and expectation by our ministry. Well, like Fred Mills, I've put in over 36 years of Salvation Army service. We trained together. And I vividly recall the image that I held, which shaped my concept of correctional services. Those were the days of rugged individualism, when a Colonel Bunton was the example of the correctional officers, unorthodox, but held in highest esteem, and winning for the Salvation Army in the field of corrections a high place in the concept of parolees. And we built upon that foundation. I think of an Everett who had such whimsical quips, who was so vocal and so visible, particularly when it came to a time, that troubled time about the death penalty. I think of a Vic Greenwood, quiet, thorough, family-orientated. And back in those days, the image of the court and the bars was a justified image. We owe a lot to these saints, and I certainly salute them and recognize them as those who have given us a foundation upon which we have built a very credible expression of corrections. But there are some subtleties in the transition from those days of beginning. The perceptions of the majority continue to be the officer serving the person behind the bars and standing in the courtroom. But times have changed. The department has changed. The very composition of this conference indicates that. And what a beautiful blending it is bringing of lay and officer together as we jointly represent and seek to become the incarnation of Christ. The language of the department has changed. The whole concept of incarceration has changed. The simplistic answer to society's dilemma of separating people from society and crowding them into confines of space. Capital punishment, society's ultimate answer. And the tragic transition into youthful offenders. And we were so unwise not to read the signals of what was to follow. The whole fragmentation and breakdown of family. It was a signal that we did not recognize. And with the emancipation of women, so we begin to see the numbers increase in incarceration. And within the Army and the Correctional Department, one began to hear, with increasing frequency and persistency, a plea, a persuasion, that this esteem upon which we were riding was in jeopardy. Something needs to be done. Something needs to happen. And that favored position that we enjoyed in those early years of so many parolees assigned to us, dissipating, until today we have barely 3% of the parolees under our supervision. Of watching the whole process of funding change from grant to fee for service. And the realization that what we find difficult to do really is something that we need to do with necessity. We call it lobbying. And we are ill at ease in that arena. And out of it emerges some comments that are very disturbing. The judge who says that the traditional Army court services, which was so relevant and helpful 10 years ago, no longer applies. And he would find it difficult to know what to ask the Army officer to do if he did that today. The proliferation of agencies, the present, is making us acutely aware that we simply cannot remain as we are and where we are. It's not that we're without our accomplishments. I rejoice with you that there are 6 new offices in this country from St. John's right through to Regina, which are new. That we are upgrading services, that you now have, as we're introduced tonight, regional coordinators. We now have provincial and federal residents. We now have juvenile residents. We now have national representation. All of this is commendable. We are indeed grateful, and I say it as a department, for the increasing emphasis upon the training of officers and laity for correctional work, and the specialization that is evident here in this room tonight. But things are becoming complex. For not only is it simply encountering a prisoner, but there is the concern of professionalism in the delivery of service. There's the supervision of staff. There's the management of programs. There's the administration. It is a long way from the prison gate. And we begin to see something of the glaring weaknesses. Our inability to integrate with the fellowship of an Army Corps. A whole new jargon for those of us who are not close to the correctional scene. Bail verification. Supervision of fine options. Community services orders. Victim and offender reconciliation. Shoplifting programs. Residential programs. Day programs, etc., etc. I speak administratively, but it's very difficult to supply answers if you do not in fact understand the problems. What about the future? I've been intrigued to see how often I encounter the phrase, quote, sleeping giant, end of quote, when people talk about the Salvation Army. Their perception is that we have it if we could only release it. Allow me to speak administratively first of all. Then I want to speak about the spiritual profile of those who work within corrections for the 21st century. But first of all, administratively. The deployment of personnel is what I would see as the chief challenge facing us in the field of corrections. The selection of personnel, the training of personnel. For, as I am wont to say to myself on many occasions, good intentions are not enough. What we need is intelligent goodness. It says something about each of us. I representing administration, you representing corrections. That we need to look at who we are and what we're doing in a way that we've never done it before. It is not simply commitment. As beautiful and commendable as that may be, but those who are looking at us and wanting our needs, wanting our service rather, are expecting from us, first of all, an awareness of what's going on. Secondly, the ability to detach ourselves from what is going on and to objectively and selectively provide service in an effective and efficient way. Secondly, in a very competitive field, I tend to think that the Salvation Army will need to become selective in its involvement. There is no longer the luxury of trying to please everyone by doing everything. We neither have the resources in person or purse. We will need to become selective in our involvement. Thirdly, and you've already initiated this, in a territory as vast as this, we simply have to decentralize our whole process of supervision. And we are grateful for what has already been achieved in this area. And fourthly, we are going to have to exercise ourselves with greater diligence and competence in the whole area of lobbying. It need not be a negative term. It need not have subtleties which we draw away from. If we bring the same kind of integrity to that lobby, which we rightfully can bring as those who represent a spiritual need and purpose. In preparation for this evening, I asked some of your representatives to share with me their perceptions. With the perceptions came the papers, the positional statements, and I can only react most positively to the quality and range which I found. And that speaks well of what can happen and will happen in the future. Now, what about the spiritual profile of those who work in corrections? Will you allow me to identify what I think are the priorities in this profile. First of all, the supremacy of attitude. The supremacy of attitude. And by attitude, I mean the spirit in which we render service. If there is a dominant theme that emerges from the profile of Christ, it is the attitude with which he encounters people. Need I remind you tonight that we choose the attitude we take in any given relationship? May I repeat that? We choose the attitude we take in any given relationship. It is a volitional act on my part. And where I do not volitionally choose, my attitude will reflect all the common complaints that we often author attitude from, such as whether I had a good night's rest, such as whether or not my stomach is upset for the day, such as whether I've had a bad experience that I did not cope well with. But any profile examination of Christ leaves one astounded with the consistency of attitude with which he met people. Paul takes that attitude and he examines it very carefully and he assigns it a name. He says it is love. And in his analysis in 1 Corinthians 13, it becomes abundantly clear that you never generate this love. You partake of this love. It is his love in us that helps us to achieve that attitude of relationship. And what is the distinctive of that love? The distinctive of the love is that it always is encountering people on the basis of what they need, not what they deserve. Is it any wonder that the prophet gives a profile of the coming of Jesus as one who will speak and act in justice? Is it any wonder that Jesus selects that scroll and reads that this Spirit is upon me, and this is the way I will encounter the prisoner? Always on the basis of need, not what they deserve. It is an attitude which is fueled by his love, not mine. I think the telling of the story of the Good Samaritan was simply to heighten our awareness of this. For the obvious of the story was the fact that the Samaritan was non-discriminating, non-selective, non-judgmental. But he did what needed to be done. And in that attitude, it revealed, Jesus says, what is the mercy of God towards all men. Thank God for Mother Teresa, who personalizes what it means and lifts up that which is rejected and despised in the streets of Calcutta and holds in her arms a human being and does something beautiful for God. Thank God for John Vanier, who gathers around him all those who are mentally handicapped and forms a village in France. And if you've never read his book, Eruption to Hope, do read it. For he shares in that book the perceptions that come through helping. And he says in that book that he's come to the conclusion that they are the normal people. We are the abnormal. Because we are the ones who hold up the mask of competence and coping. We want people to think that we're making it. They simply live life as it is and as they are, and they enjoy life. But John Vanier helps us to see what is the personification of this attitude. Secondly, I think the profile needs the dimension of maturity. And by that I mean men and women of God who think consequentially. Men and women of God who think consequentially. What is it that I'm doing? What is it that I hope to achieve? What is it that my words are revealing about this mind of mine? What is it that my hands are demonstrating as it is a copy, a revelation of Christ? Thinking consequentially. Jesus in Luke 14 speaks very clearly to the crowd who follows him about counting cost. First of all, he speaks about relational costs. That if you're going to follow me, then you've got to hate your mother, your father, your brother and sister, and the word hate biblically is to love less. That there's got to be a priority in the loving. There is a cost. There is a consequence of following me. Secondly, he says, not only does it have to do with relationships in life, but it has to do with activity. If you're going to build a tower, sit down and first of all, estimate whether you have the wherewithal to finish it. So there is a cost of what we leave behind, there is a cost of what we look towards in doing. Thirdly, the profile, the spiritual profile, must include competence. And I utter that in the biblical sense of what you do with what you've got. That's what I mean by competence. Jesus, in his teaching of the parables of the talents in Matthew 25, makes it abundantly clear that the important thing isn't whether you are richly endowed with 10 talents or 5 talents or 1 talent. That's irrelevant to the point of what he's saying. The point is, what have you done with what you do have? That is competence. And at the risk of being gloriously misunderstood tonight, I have encountered people of tremendous competence who could not read or write, but they used what they have. And I've met a lot of dumb BAs. Am I understood? there is an inescapable biblical principle of stewardship. God is going to hold me accountable for what I've got, be it 10, 5, or 1. And that day of accountability comes to all of us. Fifthly, that spiritual profile that I'm describing here tonight includes knowledge. I include in that expression tonight a wisdom and an understanding that is linked with relationships. It is not simply that I can recite, but rather it is that I have the perception to know what the meaning is. Tonight, we begin what will be very special days, not only individually, that is assured. The corridor fellowship, the coffee conversations, the interactions between people will make these days rich. But these days are significant for the whole field of corrections within the Salvation Army in this territory. And you are the ones who can bring a momentum that has direction and purpose and sensitivity to what God would have us be and do in this day and generation and as we face the 21st century. I am tremendously impressed by reading your agenda and the scope of the workshops and the range of subjects. And I commend the committee who worked hard at it. If we react in openness and receptivity, we not only can be enriched ourselves, but collectively we can bring into focus what in fact ought to be the direction. It does not absolve those of us who are responsible administratively, but it does suggest that there is a mutual responsibility that we dare not overlook. May under the Spirit of God there be that kind of thinking in these days that will be saying, what have I done? And in honesty, reviewing who I am, why I'm here, what I'm doing. And may we apply under that spirit the accountability and stewardship for our assignment. And then, with that awareness, with that understanding, we can then address the future, the 21st century, and say, what can I do, what can we do collectively that will more adequately and competently address the needs of the increasing population who come under the jurisdiction of the correctional system. And may we be within that system its salt. May we be within that system its salt. Creating thirst, preserving from corruptions by the integrity of our own spiritual life and the authority to our work that we bring because of that integrity. May God help us and use us, and may God bless this conference.
Thank you very much, Colonel. For your time. coming. Let's give this.
Yeah, I would like to express our appreciation to Colonel Calvert. He did indeed speak to us on the topic that we asked him to, and I believe he has stirred and challenged the hearts of all of us. So I thank you as well, Colonel Calvert. It is my privilege at this time to welcome each one of you to our conference, but we wanted to have a special welcome as well tonight, and I'm going to ask my good friend Claudette if she would come along at this time and express her words of welcome as well. Thank you, Claudette.
C'est un vrai plaisir pour moi de souhaiter la bienvenue aux délégués de la belle province. L'espérance de la comité est que cette conférence nationale sera une inspiration pour vous tous. Le thème pour la conférence indique que nous voulons mieux servir dans les spécialités correctionnelles dans l'avenir. Pendant les 4 journées que nous serons ensemble, nous allons apprendre des solutions aux défis qui sont devant nous. Marchons ensemble avec confiance dans le Seigneur à la grande tâche qui nous attend dans les services correctionnels. Que le Seigneur vous bénisse.
I made reference to the excellent committee that has supported me for well over a year now, and we have met ever since, I believe it was last May. We had our first meeting, and I started sending correspondence across the territory from that time on. And I'd like to make reference to the list that is in your kit. You may not have that list with you, but I would like for the conference committee members to stand at this time so you can see them and express your appreciation to them for a job well done. Please stand, committee members. I might add that they're not all here tonight. There will be some joining us a little later on in the conference, and we will introduce them at that time. Let's express our appreciation. I would like to make a special comment to some of our committee members, because you will need to know who they are as the days go on. You probably will have some questions that will relate to their specific responsibilities. Captain Moulton already mentioned his responsibility as program chairman, but Dave, I'd like you to stand again so everyone can see how fine a good-looking man you are, and they will know who to go to if they do not know where they should be when they see that workshop list up. So Dave, he will look after you, and he will tell you where to go.
I got news for him.
Thank you, Dave. I welcome Mrs. Webster as our official hostess for the conference at supper time, and have clearly designated what her duties are, so you will know if you have any problems with your accommodation or with your meals or with any other needs you may have as far as our living and sharing together in the next couple of days, you may speak to Mrs. Webster. I want to also make mention to our logistics man. Where's the lieutenant? Stand. This is This is Lieutenant Stan Lockhurst, and Stan is responsible for the setting up of all the workshops for overhead projectors, video work, and we'll be working very closely with Pat. He's also responsible for making sure there's enough chairs in your room. So if there is a problem in that area, or if there's a concern you may have if you are doing a presentation or a workshop, please speak to Stan. I know you'll find him very cooperative and supportive. I believe we should also make mention of the fact that Stan has also been able to coerce a couple of assistants, and I think Captain Brian Smith. So Brian, you better stand too, just in case they can't find Stan. All right? One of the beautiful things about our committee is that the committee kept branching out into subcommittees, and I don't know what you call the second to that, whether it's a subcommittee, but there are so many committees now that have sprung off from the main committee that I'm going to find it hard to address all of them each time I stand. But I will say sincerely from my heart that they have been excellent to work with and most cooperative, and I'm sure that over the next few days I will have opportunity to express my appreciation to each and every one of them. One person we must make mention to because he is very important in the coordination of affairs in the next couple of days, and that's Captain Guthrie. Where is my friend? You met him at supper time, and he has put together a roster of officers of the day and also people who will be responsible for the morning devotional. And if the officers of the day have any concerns, would they please speak to Bruce? And I believe I would like to meet with each officer of the day first thing in the morning with regards to announcements that will have to be relayed at meal times. I do have two announcements to make now, and the first is this: if any of us still have, and I say that way because I do, still have my car out front, in front of the conference building, we must move it over to the parking lot, which is up by the highway. And this should be done this evening because that is a fire exit and entrance area at the front. My second announcement is that we must have all committee members meet here at the front for a photo that's going to be taken with Colonel and Mrs. Calvert at the conclusion of this meeting. Thank you very much. Do have a good conference.
I'm not going to use this gavel, but this meeting is adjourned.
Gentlemen, Major Tackaberry, it is my personal pleasure to be with all of you this morning. It is with equal pleasure that I bring you the greetings of our Commissioner of Corrections, Mr. Riel LeBlanc, as well as his right-hand man, Gordon Pinder. To state that these gentlemen have, other than a 100% profound commitment to community corrections, would be to mislead you. These gentlemen have really changed the direction of the Federal Correctional Service of Canada from one of looking inward at the institutional side of the operation to one of projecting that we do have a mandate that we must work with our community partners in terms of controlling and managing and hopefully successfully reintegrating offenders into the community. That this is necessary work would again be an understatement because you people are the living testimony of how essential that work is. With respect to the Dobney Commission, and this is not really to demonstrate that Gord's heart is in the right place, but simply to relate the fact of the matter that for about 6 weeks in my rather frequent conversations with Gord being my so-called corporate boss, he has on each and every occasion and with great enthusiasm mentioned his participation here, so that it was with great personal regret that he was unable to attend. The Commissioner and his senior staff were with the Dobney Commission Thursday, and they have to go back tomorrow. And as you know, in the scheme of things, we are but the servants of our elected lords and masters, and therefore the importance and the upstaging, as it were, of your very important event. I would take this opportunity, Major Tackaberry, to urge you, to urge your organization that whenever you have an opportunity to appear before this committee, and I don't, perhaps my colleagues from Ottawa or Ole tomorrow would be able to say more on this, but the importance of putting before these ladies and gentlemen, the members of Parliament, the importance of community corrections and whatever directions the Salvation Army of Canada particularly would see community corrections as going, and how community corrections must integrate with the overall criminal justice system. I think that's a very important matter for you to consider. In what I'm about to say, I would also emphasize that in the main, these are Lord's words, and I am the relator. And having read them, I hope that you will find them challenging in terms of our being the Correctional Service of Canada and yours, the Salvation Army, challenge to the future as we approach the 21st century. It is only 13 years until the 21st century, and I am confident that we will be leading the Western world into the greatest community correction system ever. In contrast, I think it would be true to say that the 20th century was more than half over before we left behind forever many traditional ideas of the time that saw corrections as almost entirely punishment and incarceration. The private sector played a key role in shaking this lethargy and led the public in helping define and bring into being a common bond of united partnership. The development of probation, parole, diversion, community residential centers, a wide variety of aftercare and community services, temporary absences, and for those of you from the metro area particularly, a somewhat touchy but certainly of major importance, the development of direct supervision by the private sector. The list goes on, but all of these have their roots in the imagination of private citizens, organizations, and agencies, collaborating more and more effectively with the public sector. Until 1960, as many of you are aware, all of our institutions were maximum security. We accepted very little direct responsibility for offenders once they were released. In the very few years since then, there has been an incredible change for the better. For example, a wide range of education and vocational training programs, including our adult basic educational literacy training, living skills, a variety of programs, including psychological and psychiatric interventions, have been introduced everywhere to address the need to prepare inmates for the return to the community, where a comprehensive support network helps them adjust after release. We take much of this for granted, while those outside our country regard our progress as remarkable. Yes, a great deal happened in a relatively short time. Some say it wasn't enough. Others say it was too much. Philosophies were eagerly embraced and then found wanting. Outside factors like population increases, the drug culture, and fiscal restraint all contributed to a certain confusion about direction in the mid-70s. In some cases, these teething problems were solved. In others, unfortunately, they were replaced by growing pains. It will remain impossible to achieve the perfect balance between central control and delegation, or to ensure consistency without regulating people to death. This latter debate is for those who have been sidetracked into the rhetoric of the supper club we must concentrate all our available energy on real-life resolutions to real-life problems. It is in this regard that we look to the future with the Salvation Army. I'm pleased to say, with important and major field workers such as Fred Jackson, whom I know personally, the Supper Club is not the venue of the Salvation Army. The front line, the working with the offender, is the front line. An important issue for CSC was to reconcile our twin responsibilities of protecting the public and of rehabilitating the offender. In the past, it was suggested that these responsibilities were diametrically opposed, particularly in those early days in the 1960s, when the true thrust toward rehabilitation was just revolving. I recall the rhetorical word or phrase was the dichotomy between security and treatment or rehabilitation. We, in the long run, protect the public through more than keeping the offenders safely locked up. It means returning them, and we must return them to the community as soon as it is safely possible, and help them to stay there. The Correctional Service of Canada's mission statement clearly describes our responsibilities in compatible terms and reflects the approach which I believe will take the Correctional Service of Canada into the 21st century and beyond. Our mission statement is: the Correctional Service of Canada, as part of the criminal justice system, contributes to the protection of society by exercising safe, secure, and humane control of offenders while helping them become law-abiding citizens. How are we breaking down, defining, implementing, monitoring, and meeting the objectives of the mission statement? First, from sentencing until warrant expiry date, the managing of sentences through a sound case management system will be a more complete means of analyzing and trying to come to grips with the needs of the offender. Important information will be meticulously collected and shared with responsible others. Another 2 years will see a totally automated offender management system. There are 2 points that I would like to clarify. We have to have full disclosure, one with the other, one being the Correctional Service of Canada, the other being its community corrections partners. We must all understand that we stand for the protection of the public through these reasonable and humane means of control, which are one thing in an institutional setting, but are profoundly more dynamic and challenging in the community management of the offender. In sharing with others, lest any of you have members of police agencies on your board, they are very sensitive at this point in time, and from their point of view, correctly so, about the sharing of security information with our community corrections partners. Nonetheless, when these events occur, it is up to the local people to apply the lubricant of common sense to ensure that in this case, the three elements of the criminal justice system, namely CSC and the parole board, or let's say the federal government, work with the community corrections as well as the police, and wherever those local problems occur, that they are handled and resolved at the local level. I would also like to comment very briefly on the offender management system. This is a computerized system that takes the offender from date of sentence to the warrant expiry date. A little later on, I will make some reference to the Rygrock Commission, but one of the elements of that commission was the lack of documentation and the lack of thoroughness on our part in collecting this documentation. One of the important things that the offender management system will have programmed into it is what are the essential elements of documentation before we can get to any substance of case management. And it will automatically flag for us those reports that we have failed to get and where we should be getting them from. It will keep track in a comprehensive manner of the progress or lack of progress of an offender. And this will include community management of the offender. Now, this is not to mislead you that we're putting all our eggs in the basket of a machine. The machine will only be as good as the people are who provide the inputs and who retrieve all the information. It will be an assistance to our field staff. It will be a facilitator to all who work in community corrections. And for those of you who work particularly in or near the federal jurisdiction, in the coming months, I would urge you to ask your case management counterparts at the regional headquarters level to give you a comprehensive briefing on just what offender management is. Through this intercommunication, necessary treatment and training will be more easily identified and provided within institutions. All staff will be better trained in and committed to and evaluate correctional as well as custodial responsibilities. Wardens and their staffs will be more accountable. All will contribute to establishing a truly correctional environment in our institutions. Another development during perhaps the last year and a half or less is what we call case management strategies. And there are about 5 basic elements to this where we gather the data, do what is called a force field analysis, or to make it a little more simple, an analysis of what we have gathered and what we have been able to glean of and from the inmate. There will be a program action plan that will be monitored and evaluated and redirected as required, both within the community and as well as in the institutional part of the sentence. The point of this system, stated in its most simple terms, is to get at the causes of criminality. We can do all the nice things of saying, my poor friend, my friend, however one wishes to express it, you need A, you need B, you need C. And none of these things will do him any harm, because each and every one of us needs all the development we can get. But if we pretend through these program initiatives that they alone cure the inmate's criminality, we both delude ourselves, we delude the public, and unfortunately, we delude the person whom we have the mandate to help. So we believe that getting at the causes of criminality and trying to deal with them again in the context of community, with our community corrections partners. I'm not certain, Major Bunton, but if he hasn't already done so, Mike Crowman, for example, our district director, will be approaching you and offering to train those members of your community staff in the case management strategies who wish that training. And for those of you from other parts of Canada, I would invite you to challenge my regional counterparts to similarly offer this training to you. More than ever before, programming will be increasingly tailored to meet identified individual needs. Many inmates are non-literate. Adult basic education is a very high priority. To emphasize the priority, this is a personal commitment of the Right Honourable James Kelleher, the Solicitor General of Canada. Many inmates need substance abuse treatment and or living skills programs. There are new methods, new programs, new standards being ready for implementation. Some of these services are being provided through contract. However, even though some of our community corrections officers might agree, there is no push toward privatization for the sake of privatization. It is likely the 50-50 balance between CSC and contract staff in these areas will remain the norm. I would qualify this 50-50. Our minister has made a commitment that community corrections nationally will have a norm of about 30%. I would emphasize for the point of clarity that is a national norm. And to meet that national norm in, for example, places, any major metropolitan area, that will probably go up beyond 50%, if not moderately beyond that, in order to achieve, on a national average, the 30% commitment of the national commitment of the Solicitor General of Canada. These plans, aspirations, are not dreams. We, and again I emphasize, we includes all of us, are on the cutting edge of implementation of management of offenders that is heretofore unforeseen and may have been unthinkable not very many years ago. I would emphasize that I also include in the we the National Parole Board, because without their executive authority, their legislative, the exercise of their legislative mandate, we will not get the offenders into the community. And I just simply wanted to introduce that element to you, and I'll leave further amplification of that to the chairman of the Parole Board when he is with you tomorrow morning. We are moving steadily towards realizing all of these goals. In spite of the need for fiscal restraint, which is not going to change, in spite of significant variations in inmate populations over which we have no control, at least at the point of sentencing, I am confident we will meet these challenging objectives. CSC took two rather bold initiatives to respond to the changing environment in 1985. The first was expanding the scope of services provided by exchange of services agreements with the provinces and the territories. Benefits are particularly helpful, and the speed with which new beds became available through these initiatives with some of the provinces compared to the speed with which CSC would have been able to provide them on their own made this an attractive and obvious course for us to pursue. Second, this increase in inmates did not lead to a corresponding increase in CSC staff, thereby making better use of federal resources. Third, provincial prisons are more widely spread, and inmates are more likely to be within easy reach of their home and the support that gives than if they were housed in more distant federal institutions. These agreements can provide us, the federal service, with up to 900 extra beds. It goes without saying, however, that there are principles and conditions which must be followed. First, there must be guarantees to ensure the welfare of the inmate. Second, the costs to CSC are based on a combination of a capital contribution for a specified number of guaranteed beds for federal offenders and guaranteed per diem payments for these beds. The costs must be equivalent to other alternatives. Safeguards are built in to prevent services being suddenly withdrawn, as well as to prevent other situations which could cause an unhealthy dependence on the provinces. Perhaps the most innovative provincial contractual arrangement made by CSC is in the area of community corrections. Alberta had long been interested in expanding its role in the supervision of federal offenders in the province. On the other hand, many of CSC's small parole offices in Alberta were not cost efficient. Though the vast distances and the need for supervision capacity across the province were strong arguments against reducing their numbers. While federal and provincial systems often overlap, Alberta's system was far more comprehensive because of the relatively large number of provincial offenders. An agreement was made with Alberta, therefore, for the province to deliver all community correction services, both federal and provincial. The new agreement was designed to protect staff who were offered positions with the province or elsewhere within the CSC. The new agreement also ensures the quality of programs that CSC and NPB require. At this point, I would also like to talk about what we call the administrative agreement between CSC and the NPB. These, while there is a national agreement in the new way of doing things and decentralization, delegation, all those nice things, each region has an agreement with the regional panel of the National Parole Board. This agreement spells out the terms and conditions of or under which federal inmates are to be supervised, be it in a CRC through to direct supervision. Human nature being as imperfect as it is, if any of you who are in the field of direct supervision happen to, or in a community correctional setting, not be aware of this administrative agreement, please go to your nearest district director or area manager at the earliest convenience to ensure that you have a copy of this and that you understand what it is all about. Mr. Engstrup may or may not comment further on that, but I just wanted to mention that the importance of that document to you in respect to the management of federal offenders. The second way CSC has dealt with the need for restraint and with increased population is through the increased reliance on and partnership with community corrections. In addition, there is the government commitment to reducing the size of the public sector. This helped CSC in its decision to encourage private sector agencies to become more involved in supervision. I want to make it clear that CSC believes, and I want to make it clear that I, as well as Gord Pinder and Riel LeBlanc, fervently support the view that rehabilitation must take place in the community itself. Any correctional setting, as you all know, is a completely unreal and artificial environment. When we talk of simulating outside conditions in a penitentiary, we all know we have to try, but we all also know, if we are at all honest with ourselves, that this is an unreal environment and that rehabilitation must occur in the community, because it is there that the offender offends, if you'll forgive my poor grammar. Whatever the pragmatic reasons, the correctional principles that went with them were equally compelling. The protection of society must be guaranteed, but in the context of alternatives to incarceration where possible. Last year, because of the expected introduction of Bill C-67, even though the speed of the introduction was somewhat unexpected, and because of the National Parole Board's continued confidence in the use of residential facilities for offenders, the Correctional Service of Canada increased the funds available to purchase community release center beds and related programming by $5 million over the 1985-1986 levels. Those of you who work in the milieu of federal institutions will, I am sure, have heard of the restraint that institutions now operate under. I suspect many of them tend to blame the government in the name of restraint. It was in the name of restraint, but it was primarily in the name of reprofiling our budget in order that we could make available this additional money to community corrections without having to go to our Treasury Board for more funds to do so. Many of you know that our caseloads have in fact risen in the last year and a half from an average of 7,345 to over 9,000 at the present time. I perhaps shouldn't say over 9,000, let me just say in the vicinity plus or minus of 9,000. And I would hope again that you will exercise some degree of missionary type zeal in encouraging Mr. Engstrup to keep this very wonderful trend on the go, if not a little more alive than it even is now. I can tell you that the quality support services have been maintained in spite of the increasing number of offenders in the community. CSC caseloads have, in the main, remained manageable. You can be assured that we will continue to be innovative and unafraid to look at new programming options that will improve the way in which CSC and NPB does business in the community. it seems likely that the extent to which the private sector is involved in direct supervision will be stabilized at the percentage rates I have previously indicated. And I believe that nationally we are moving toward those figures in an effective manner. There are an increased number of private sector facilities, not all of which are primarily residential. Many offenders who can benefit from community-based programs may not need the structure and control which is inherent in a residential setting. The capacity to offer programs without a full-time residency requirement permits better individual programming and frees up bed space which can be used more productively. Examples of these would be, with the National Parole Board approval, to move people into, let's say, foster home or boarding type facilities, perhaps satellite apartments. This what is an approach we view as being pragmatic. It moves people through CRCs more quickly, not for the sake of moving with speed, but for the sake of getting those people who have demonstrated that they can handle more responsibility into a more responsibility center. And the second aspect of that is to move the people who are on waiting lists in the institutions into the community more quickly. Within this wider framework, we must all make it our business to let the public know what we are about, to reassure them of their often legitimate concerns, and of course comply at the municipal level with bylaws and regulations. We have a lot to do, and quite simply, the Correctional Service of Canada is confident that together it can all be done. The sense of partnership shared by all of us involved in community corrections can only be intensified as a result of recommendations arising from the tragic death of Celia Ryground. Standards have been developed, as you know, and they will be applied consistently. The standards concern security and safety of staff and facilities. They concern training programs, they concern diagnosis, and they concern the sharing of information, to name a few. CSE is prepared to provide financial assistance through block funding and also to give other kinds of help if we can. It will be necessary for agencies to define the programs they will offer and to accept the responsibility for delivering what they have defined. Independent and systematic audits will monitor what is happening across the country, and we can be sure that a better standard of service will result. Good service does not depend solely on quality of individual programs. CSC believes the best approach is a holistic approach. This means that agencies must involve themselves with the offender from commencement of sentence to warrant expiry date and to provide a continuum of care. Those of you who have a more national perspective than I have, or those of you who come from a region of Canada other than the Ontario region, would bear with me if I have no wider base of experience than to quote regional examples. But in terms of the context and to emphasize the importance of involving themselves from sentence to warrant expiry date, you have The example of your ministry in Kingston, which I think is not uncommon, I believe is not uncommon, but is nonetheless a very commendable example, and that is backed up by the important work done in the Archibald Centre in Toronto, to name but one. I cannot too strongly emphasize the importance of that example of involvement from sentence to warrant expiry to provide, as I said, this continuum of care. There are examples not only with the Salvation Army, but with other organizations who offer professional supervision, employment services, family transportation services, as well as access to a number of valuable programs such as addiction and literacy training. Within CSC, we tend to describe it as a one-stop shopping approach, which could, we believe, be the wave of the future, particularly in the major metropolitan areas of Canada. To attest that the Salvation Army is on the cutting edge of this change, in 86-87, we had 1,774 person months being supervised, 459 community assessments, for a value just in excess of $266,000. In terms of CRCs, we used close to 31,000 bed days for a value of almost $1,142,000. In 87-88, our ceiling for supervision and community assessments rose to almost $373,000, and our CRC ceilings stand at pennies less than $1,250,000. Let us work in partnership to protect the public through community control. In particular, and a particular key to the success of this will be the collaboration between the Salvation Army, the National Parole Board, and the Correctional Institution. This will further reduce institutionalization and increase the numbers of offenders under community control. This holistic approach, strengthened by standards that are adhered to and accountability for everyone involved, lies at the heart of the Correctional Service of Canada's vision for community corrections in the 21st century. I know each of you will be an integral player as this scenario unfolds. Let us all make it a good century for those who will follow us. Thank you very much.
Some of you have paid the price of already having listened to me once or twice, and I'm not sure if that means you run out of options or you're back here because you like to be, but some of you I've met in other ways here at the conference, and I would just say it's my real distinct pleasure to be here. I have met some of you so long ago as 2 or 3 years ago in places in the States where we were together at volunteer conferences, and I guess that's probably the reason I'm here today, because of some of the networking and interaction that we had there. We want to talk very much today about the process of volunteers, and I want to talk about not just recruiting, but also how we retain volunteers and how we make sure that our volunteers are quality volunteers, all of which I find to be a part of the process. We are constantly not only interested in generating volunteers, but how do we continue to serve together in those relationships, and how do we maintain those kind of quality volunteers.
We're passing out right now an outline. Is there anyone in the room who didn't get one of these? Okay, we got a couple right up here in front.
Thanks.
We'll use this outline. I am not going to try to go 1, 2, 3 and point out things and have you fill in little blanks, but in generally I will proceed in this order. I do want you, though, to feel free at any time that there's something we want to talk about. Please stop me. Let's talk about it, and let's not feel compelled to lock in on this thing or think that my time up here is so valuable that I've got to say it all. You know, if you have a need, we get something up on the surface, let's stop and talk about it, okay? Before we do anything else, though, shall we go to our Lord? Father, we just come to you today, opening ourselves up to your Spirit, and we just pray that we will be receptive, Father, as we share information, as we commit ourselves in a new way to attempting to generate those people around us, to share the Word, to share the joy of ministering to that group of people whom so many think are unworthy. We thank you for that privilege. We thank you for this wonderful conference and the coming together here. And let's ask your blessings now on all that we say and do in the next 90 minutes. We pray that it'll all go to lift up only the name of Jesus. It's in his name we pray. Amen. Let me begin by reading a modern parable. I wish I had written this, but I didn't. See if it makes any sense. On a dangerous seacoast where shipwrecks often occur, there was once a crude little life-saving station. The building was just a hut, and there was only one boat. But the few devoted members kept a constant watch over the sea. And with no thought for themselves, they went out day and night, tirelessly searching for the lost. Many lives were saved by this wonderful little life-saving station, so they became famous. Some of those who were saved, and various others in the surrounding area, wanted to become associated with the station and to give it their time and their money in an effort to support its work. New boats were bought, new crews were trained, and the little life-saving station grew. Some of the members of the life-saving station were unhappy that the building was so crude and poorly equipped. They felt that a more comfortable place should be provided for the first refuge of those saved from the sea. So they replaced the emergency cots with beds, and they put better furniture in the enlarged building. Now the life-saving station became a popular gathering place for its members. And they decorated it beautifully, and they furnished it exquisitely, because they used it as sort of a club. Fewer members were now interested in going to sea on life-saving missions, so they hired lifeboat crews to do the work. About this time, a large ship was wrecked off the coast, and the hired crews brought in boatloads of cold, wet, and half-drowned people. They were dirty, they were sick, and some of them had black skin. And the beautiful new club was in chaos. So the property committee immediately had a shower field outside the club where victims of the shipwreck could be cleaned up before coming inside. And at the next meeting, there was a split in the club membership. Most of the members wanted to stop the club's life-saving activities as being altogether too unpleasant and really a hindrance to the normal social life of the club. Some members insisted upon life-saving as their primary purpose and pointed out that they were still called a life-saving station after all. But they were finally voted down and told that if they wanted to save the lives of all of the various kinds of people who were shipwrecked in those waters, that they could just go and build their own life-saving station down the coast. And they did. As the years went by, the new station experienced the same changes that occurred in the old. It evolved into a club, and yet another life-saving station was founded. History continued to repeat itself. And if you visit that seacoast today, you will find a number of exclusive clubs along the shore. Shipwrecks are still frequent in those waters, but most of the people drown. I think we don't have to belabor the meaning of that parable, but I wanted to share it with you this morning because I think that first and foremost, when you and I talk about recruiting volunteers, I think we need to understand that our reasons and our motivations and the place from which we come is essential. There are ways to get volunteers in the secular community, and one does things and appeals to different sorts of things than you do when we're talking about the religious community. I, at least, am a purist in the sense that I think that our underlying assumptions and our reasons and our theological perspectives have to be pure and important. And so I have shared with you some things that I think we need to make, some underlying assumptions, and things that we need to communicate to the Christian world. Now, I know many times we're trying to communicate these things to people within our own church. Maybe we're trying to communicate them, however, with members of other faith groups or with members of the community at large. Whatever the issue, I think that we ought to understand some underlying assumptions. And the first one I would suggest to you that basically the vast majority of the Christian world even does not consider itself as an agent of change. It considers itself, I'm afraid, as something akin to a social club, or certainly some sort of theological expert, but not as often as it should be, an agent of change. And we always talk about in corrections, one of the fundamental issues, and we keep hearing it everywhere we go, whether or not it's expressed by parole people, or whether it's expressed by you and I, chaplains, whatever, we are in the business of dealing with wrecked lives and with people who need some change. I am not content with bringing some sort of a salvation message to people and getting someone into some category of being saved. We should do that. But unless we can try to bring some liberation that has the power to change one's life, then we continue to have someone who might be saved, but who continues to live a frustrated life here on earth. And I think our call is more than that. And I think we need to understand that when we communicate and we're trying to challenge volunteers, that we are in the business of being active agents of change. Corrections is everybody's business. Used to be a slogan from the Georgia Department of Corrections. I wish they'd kept that. I still had a few bumper stickers I passed out for years, and we finally ran out of them. I think we need to understand that. The flap here in Toronto and in Canada about parole, of course, we are experiencing, and we go through that just kind of, it's a cyclical situation in the States. Every time we have some new situation, we talk about it. But the flap about parole, regardless of whether one serves an extra 11 months or whether one serves 2/3 or whatever, the bottom line is 96 or 97% of those people are going to be out and going to be in our communities. That is our problem. It's a theological problem. It's also a sociological problem. It's a problem of community. And it's something that we have to encourage, and we have to make sure that the people who we're trying to recruit from understand that. We also, I believe, have got to make people understand that punishment and exile and some sort of revenge or getting even is not equal to, is not the same as deterring, rehabilitating, or changing people. It was curious to me today when the parole, the gentleman here, Oleg, speaks about murderers. You see, the public perception on murder is that that's who we're afraid of. It doesn't surprise me at all that out of those numbers, only 3 out of 573 recommitted the offense of murder. That's a given with murderers. They very seldom recidivate or reoffend. Burglars is another story. Those people are in a lifestyle pattern. You see, that's a misperception, and somehow the feeling by the community that you and I deal with, you and I have got to educate those people in understanding some of these issues, and that's one of them, that somehow exile and getting even and all these punishment issues, these sorts of things, are somehow matched and automatically a part of a rehabilitation, a change, a regenerating process. And that's not the case. Rehabilitation can take place only if we do something in the midst of the context of that punitive sort of system. I think we also need to make sure that the people understand and we accept, and in our challenge to volunteers, that deeds, crimes, the things people do are only symptoms of a very basic illness that all of us had at one time, separation from God. Those kinds of things up on the surface are not the problem. We have got to go beneath the surface, and we have got to begin to get at the root of these causes. And I think that takes some things on our behalf and some things that we have got to share with volunteers. In the first place, when we're trying to recruit volunteers, we have got to recruit people of commitment. Our commitment has got to be for the duration. Luke 9, verses 61 and 62, somewhere right along there, Jesus is talking about, or Luke is telling about these people that came to Jesus. And there was 3 people. The last one particularly, I think, is applicable to this particular area, because the last one comes to Jesus and says, I really want to follow, but I got some things to take care of first. And Jesus says, no man who putteth his hand to the plow and looks back is worthy. Now, I don't know how many of you come from that agrarian background or whatever, but if you plow a field and you keep looking over your shoulder, what happens? That's right. Our commitment, once we commit to this thing, and when we get volunteers, I think we need to be careful about nonchalantly incorporating people into this thing. You people know more than anybody, we're in the Army. we're in a battle. And we shouldn't nonchalantly pull a few people in to do a few things. The things that we want to accomplish take commitment. And they take that kind of commitment and people who can't look back. And I would rather have 3 or 4 of you who understand that than a house full of you who don't have that commitment. God works through our weaknesses, not through our strengths. That includes strengths and numbers. And your attitude, I think, and the attitude of these people have got to be right. We have a lot of trouble sometimes with attitude, my experience, in terms of people coming into the system. One of the attitudes about trying to help other people normally is that we extend help from up here. And we want to reach down to people. And the model I believe we have from the scriptures is from Philippians 2, which suggests that Christ thought equality with God not something to be grasped, but emptied himself, became a servant. Now, I see that as a peer level sort of ministry. And I think you and I need to always be working in terms of our attitude in a servant attitude. And we have got to recruit people who are in that same mold. We have got to all come together with the same theological assumptions. There are some unhealthy attitudes out there. There are people who are wanting to do things for the wrong reasons, the wrong motivations. And I talk about that. We don't need sympathetic people. We don't want people who have sympathy for other people. We need some people who have some empathy. And I hope we understand the difference between that. To be empathic with someone, to feel something with someone, suggests that kind of sharing, not feeling sorry for someone. There's not any place for improper motivations. Screen your volunteers carefully when you're looking at people. When you're trying to get people involved in your organization, one of the people you want to stay away from is someone who operates, I think, out of a position of guilt. I'd like to have a couple dollars for every time someone has wanted to get involved in our organization. And as I work through it, I discover that they're moving and motivated from a guilt perspective. Sometimes this scenario runs like this. Their son or daughter is now in trouble, is now on drugs, etc. And so they come to our organizations, yours and mine, with this motivated out of this guilt feeling, and they want to save someone else. Now, you see, I believe that God uses those kind of motives. God takes what is in our lives and processes that, and sometimes we become very effective. Ex-offenders are tremendously effective in ministry to other offenders at some point in their life. But they've got to work through some things before they get there. And the people who come to you with this guilt motivation, be careful of those people. I don't need those people doing their therapy on some of my unhealthy inmates. You've got 2 people who are unhealthy helping to make sure that the people you work with, and when you motivate people, that they process through some of those improper motivations. I think if you detect the scout hunter mentality in people, you need to reject those people. People who are concerned about how many people they have brought to the Lord, or they've got little notches on their belt or whatever. When I hear those discussions, and I have some little trick things that I try to talk to people about, when I see that coming, I reject those people. You don't need those people in your group. Those people will do you harm, and they'll do harm to the people that we're dealing with. a lot of those kinds of motivations. Some people just purely think this is a romantic business. I don't know where they get that at. I mean, you know, but it's fun, you know. So I love going in churches, and people always come to me and say, "Oh, you are so wonderful. I just couldn't do what you know." I mean, where does that come from? This is not that kind of business. I don't know what it is, but you've probably heard some of those things too. Make sure that people don't have romantic sorts of notions of what it is we're doing. Now, I tend to be overly zealous in making sure that everybody understands the nature of the thing we're in. I believe it causes you less trouble. I'm a little bit skeptical of the incredible success stories. And there are a lot of books on the market and a lot of books we pump in which tell these wild tales of just, you know, incredible riches happening, and these wild tales of people who have been, just lives changed automatically. That happens. But unfortunately, that's not the reality of what it is we deal with. Most of the people we deal with, man, we are in a long haul relationship, and it takes years for people to make changes, and the things we do are not all that glorious and romantic. Be careful of people who you sense that in. And I think that when you are going to try to talk about strategies then of these volunteers and recruiting the people from that first aspect, you've got to understand first off that the nature of the business we are in. And our strategy calls for several things. First off, our strategy calls for a long-term kind of commitment. The people that we deal with, as I've just said, seldom turn around overnight. Now, God does that sometimes to people. Praise His name when He does. That's not normally the case. And one of the problems we have in this business is people that I call the white knight. People who want to ride into the prison on a big white horse, wearing a big white hat, dropping some little magic dust and sprinkling it around where they go, and then riding off into the sunset. You and I don't need those kind of people in our correctional services. We need people who are going to spend time and are going to in it for the duration. People that we're dealing with, as our friend here this morning said so eloquently, these people didn't get where they got overnight. They come from homes with all sorts of problems. These types of things develop over a lifetime. You don't normally turn those things around because you are an excellent preacher or you have one or two good, anyone can usually have one of those good sermons in your pocket right here. But that doesn't usually happen overnight. So you need to gear your people in motivating and trying to recruit people for the concept of a long-term commitment to the kind of people we're in. And therefore, I think we understand that it's really people that make the difference. It's not the kind of program necessarily that you're going to run. A very interesting thing sort of happened back in the early 50s. Carl Rogers, who was a humanist psychologist, was trying to, and he conducted an experiment where at that time they were really curious, trying to discover which of the schools of psychology, and basically at that time we fell into either a Freudian psychologist, a clinical model, or the Skinnerians, the people who were behaviorists, and then Rogers, this self-actualizing concept, etc. And so they tried to do a test to try to see if we could really nail down which of these three methods worked best. And to his credit, he published the results, and the finding was that it didn't much matter whose psychology you adopted. That people got better, not because of the technique or the philosophical belief, but people got better because of two or three factors, and they all had to do with the relationship between the individual and that person who they were trying to help. If that person had empathy, if they were non-judgmental, and if they were able to develop rapport and to deal with those people in that way, that it was the nature of the relationship that made the difference. And I am here to tell you, Corrections is full of all sorts of beautiful programs that look so nice when you put them down on paper. They make the most incredible sense in the world. They go out into a field test and they fall on their face. It's really not the program that counts as much as your presence and your involvement and the personal relationships that develop. They will make the good programs work. Without that, the good programs won't work anyway. They're just pieces of paper. I think we also need to, in our recruiting, make sure that people understand and that we understand in our relationships together in the volunteer community that we automatically, being who we are, dealing with the nature of the clientele we are not going to have a high batting average. Now, I don't know chaplains who've been in this game for a while. I don't know how many people you can sit there and really define that you can verify and attest a change. Those of you who have been as long as I can probably share a lot of stories, but the fact is that we are always dealing in a low percentage sort of business. You see, we're dealing with the people that nobody else cares about and ever has cared about. And you and I are trying to find the one lost coin that's rolled over in some little crack in the corner somewhere that nobody else can see. And we're lifting rocks up and trying to find one little tiny sheep that's hiding out somewhere down there. You and I are not out in some place where we're going to have massive numbers of success. And therefore, I think you've got to be careful in terms of the people we define when you and I, and some of us in this room maybe, are having trouble with that idea of success. And are maybe burning out or have burned out. And I know a lot of people burn out because they couldn't deal with or live with a lack of success. And I think that we need to get our heads straight on that, and we need to understand that we deal in a community of failures. Success is more the norm. Success is not the norm, failure is the norm. And the success is really up to the Holy Spirit. And you and I are called to do certain things and to serve and to do what it is we do and to keep on keeping on. And where the Holy Spirit brings some success, fine. And where He doesn't bring success, that has nothing to do with our call or what it is we're about. Now you see, that's not something that most people can grasp or get a hold of, and I think you have to be very careful. And then I think that in your dealing with and trying to recruit volunteers from the theological perspectives, I think we have to make sure that we all commit to the same thing, that the people understand the necessity of a holistic sort of ministry. The ministry, the model of James, the 2nd chapter there, which talks about clothing people, feeding people, and not letting people go away hungry while you're giving them only spiritual food. Again, I don't think many of you have to be told that, but I think you may need to be reminded that we've got to get our volunteers committed in the same way. Make sure that we share that agenda with people, that we understand that change does not take place in people in a simplistic sort of salvation model, that there's much more to it, and that we are trying to offer both spiritual and physical food. That's got to be, I think, a real quick, basic sort of theological point from which we all have to come. And I really think it's important that we can agree on most of those things, and that internally you agree on key points of that, and that when you're recruiting volunteers, that all the people you recruit buy into that and are part of that same mindset. Otherwise, your agency is never going to be as successful as it could have, because you will have disparate beliefs. I really think it's very important that you have some good public relations tools, or what I call public relations. I don't like that word, but you and I need to share the word and share the message with who we are. We live in an age in which, for better or for worse, many of us are programmed, and again, it may vary somewhat depending on where you particularly are, but most of us are now products, environmentally, or our children are at least, of a visual literacy. Television is something which is impressing itself on each of us and on our families, and we are all now subject to print media, which is very sophisticated in ways in which it motivates behavior. And I think that each of us need to pay attention to that, and we need to make sure that our particular system and our particular agency has the kind of materials that will do that job well. It's very difficult to motivate a volunteer and to give a volunteer a piece of information that doesn't look good and expect some kind of response. If I give you a mimeograph sheet of paper with some smudges on it, or a couple types of different type on it, what is the person's response to that? It doesn't work. If you and I are not careful, now again, I know that we're controlled very often by your agencies. And I don't know all the things. I've seen some of the material that we have available. I think you need to make sure that in your particular area, your subsection within correctional services, that there is quality sort of material that you are able to hand to potential volunteers, to audiences, and to people wherever you go. A brochure that we have, and the reason I bring it up again, obviously we like it because we did it, but it was done by a professional who knew what they were doing. Lots of nice white space, very simple kinds of attractive thing. It's not too busy, it's readable. You can sit down and read it in one style. It is a fairly typical sort of piece of literature. Tells everything we need to know about our agency in that space. We were able to, with these people, and there are skilled people that do that, and you may have skilled people in your organization, skilled writers and people who know how to do that sort of thing. We simply handed this writer about, let's see, we handed him about 4 or 5 of our newsletters from the past, which had philosophical sorts of statements, and sheets of several things we were doing. They disseminated, kind of put all the paper together, and this is what they came up with. And it's incredible how the accuracy of saying everything we're about in all of those things. I think that you need to have a well-designed, and when I say professional, I mean functionally professional. You don't necessarily have to pay big dollars for it. You also ought to have some kind of packet. And I'll be glad to leave some of those brochures if someone, I don't know that you're interested, I'll be glad to, if you want to look at it or whatever, or take it along with you, tell something about our agency, which won't help you much, but if it'll help to look at that thing, you're welcome to take it. I think you also need a little packet, a volunteer packet that you have put together, whatever you feel is the essential information that you ought to be able to hand to every potential volunteer. And in this particular one, this was an older version of this thing. We had some information about parent organization, some information about an upcoming chaplaincy training school we had, some clean handout sheets here of a description. This is something that ought to be in a volunteer packet. It talks about this particular thing, lists who our executive board is. This particular one designed for a prospective advisory board member. And so part of this printed sheet is what we consider to be the prerequisites and the main function of an advisory board member. If I were doing this for a volunteer, then on that sheet I ought to have something about a statement, which we'll talk about in a minute, about our organization. You also ought to have some very clear-cut statements about volunteering for your organization. Something, and if you have any kind of a news release, we also have that back there, any kind of a news release or newsletter. A little packet, again, which someone can easily disseminate, and you have a prospective and a quality volunteer that will tell them something about volunteering for your organization, will tell them about your organization, and kind of set the tone for some expectations. I would also suggest to you that you get into the realm, and I know that I'm laying out I guess I'm laying out some personal prejudice, but I think my prejudices are well-founded. They're not blind prejudice. You really need to develop some quality video material. Let me share with you just a couple minutes, and I'm not interested again that I sell you on the Atlanta Chaplaincy Training School, but this tape is designed to volunteers, to motivate a group of volunteers in a church setting or anything else to the concept and the idea of prison ministry. And if you can just to take a few minutes to look at it, to show you rather imposing structure behind me is the United States.
Understand there is the visual tool. We're using some very sharp people, again, committed Christians who have great professional skills as well. Videotape, it's extremely important that videos move. If one is going to take a picture of me and talking to you, if I'm good at what I do, can talk to you for an hour and a half and can keep attention and it works. But when you put a picture of me for 90 minutes inside that little box, you can't watch it for 10 or 15 minutes. It's the most boring thing in the world to watch a talking head. Unless you are my wife who's got a vested interest and loves it anyway. You see, you could watch Friends on a video or someone you're concerned about or you have an interest, you could do that. But you cannot teach or train with that thing. It's got to move, it's got to be visual. We have to change the written message to a visual message.
Therefore, I'm saying to you that you need, if you're going to be involved in video, you need to have someone who knows what they're doing. You need to create a kind of video that works. It's not the information anymore. It's now got to be translated those visual terms. I really would encourage you to develop somehow through your agency or through the Salvation Army at large and correctional services some effective videotapes to help train people and to help even present your message. If you're only going to present your message, not a training tape, probably where you want to shoot at is about a 12 to 15 minute tape. If you're going to talk about a training series and you want to have a block of training time, you usually talk about a 25 or 30 minute tape, 35 or 40 at the most, but you really want to try to hold it in 25 to 30 minutes. But your particular message, do that thing in 12, 15 minutes. Those are the tools that we need. And then, if we've got those good tools, and we all agree where we're coming from theologically and philosophically, then we have to ask ourselves some questions about what it is that we're looking for in volunteers and what do we want. And the first thing you need to understand is this. Do not try to recruit any volunteer from guilt. Don't try to make them feel so bad that you're out there all by yourself that you manage to get them to say yes. You're only fooling yourself. That stuff won't work. Don't try to dump tasks on people. You need to make people understand. I mean, maybe if it's not, then you need to get out of the business, but you need to make people understand that what you're sharing with them is an opportunity. A tremendous opportunity. It never bothers me a bit to try to talk to a bunch of group of Christian folks sitting on pews places not doing it. It never bothers me a bit to try to talk those people into work. And if you believe what it is you're doing, you really ought to be that you're offering those people an incredible opportunity to serve. And I don't know about you, but I have been blessed a whole lot more by the people I have served inside prisons than I have offered to any of those people. Now, does any of you believe that? If you do, you really ought to be able to communicate that message to this group of folks that you're trying to recruit. And I think that you don't get desperate, and you don't just want warm bodies. You want quality people. And it's really the sales technique is, I'm not sure that I really want to sell this thing to you. I mean, you might qualify to be someone sharp enough to take advantage of it. I mean, that's the mentality. Obviously, we don't say the same thing. But it ought to be in that spirit. We need quality people. We're not just trying to get warm bodies to fill a slot. You know, if you want that, you might be able to get a warm body to watch children in a nursery. Even there, you want more than one bodies. But this is not that kind of task. We need quality people. And don't be afraid to make your request personal. As a matter of fact, that's where you ought to make it. It ought not be from this impersonal sort of way, but it's a very personal kind of experience that I'm undergoing, and I want to try to recruit you, and I want to say things to you as a friend. I really have a personal relationship. Use that kind of thing in terms of recruiting volunteers. Don't be afraid and don't make that thing so impersonal. But what you need to do first off is really create a list of needs. Now you see, when I first started dealing with volunteers, I would go out in churches, and I'm fairly good. I've got 2 or 3 sermons, Harold. I mean, I can keep going for 2 or 3 days. And I was really good at generating people who would come back afterwards and really want to do something. I didn't have anything for them to do. Has that ever happened to you? I mean, you know, we kind of a general idea. We need people. Yeah, see? Yeah. We need people to do things, but then when we get people, we say, what is it that I really want them to do? And I can't do that because that takes this skill. I can't let them do that because that's a responsibility. They can't do that. We really don't need any more of those people. And, you know, there you go. Before you try to recruit people, make a list. What is it you really need? And how many of each of those people do you need? And not only in terms of bodies, but in terms of what skills do those people need to do that task. If it's a task which takes secretarial skills or administrative skills, or if it takes teaching skills or whatever, know those things in advance. And never recruit people en masse, in general. Always recruit people for specific tasks that you have that need to be accomplished. Now, you ought to have enough tasks, or the numbers ought to be large enough, that you've got some fairly gross sorts of categories that, you know, over here are some people who really we don't need skill, or maybe we need someone who simply with a telephone voice. Over here, what we really need are maybe envelope stuffers on this particular project or something. These people don't take a lot of skill. On this side, we need some things with some very specific skills. You need to have some gross categories there to lump people in, but always have specific things in mind when you try to recruit people. Create that list. You get this wide, comprehensive list, and then prioritize it. What are the things you need the most? What are the things that are most critical? Now, there's some discussion about whether or not someone who has a skill and someone who earns their living in that skill, whether or not those people want to give that skill in a volunteer effort. The old rule of thumb used to be, don't ask someone to do a job that they do in their everyday work, because they're probably so bored to death by that that's the last thing they want to do when they come home. What we begin to think now that maybe that's not true. It appears that in a modern technological sort of age, that many people have entered a profession or have developed a skill and are looking for some fulfillment, but sometimes on that job market they're not getting the fulfillment out of their job, and yet they have a skill, they have a desire, they really want to do something, but they're not being able to get fulfilled on the job, or they're not using it in a creative sort of way. They're using it in a very mundane sort of way. And so it's really a mixed bag. You need to consider that sometimes people who have that skill want to use it in your organization. But you also have to be careful that you don't overload people. In every church I've ever been in, everybody who, if there's anybody in there who has some sort of accounting skill, has been the church treasurer or been some kind of treasurer for the last 40 years. And every year they do the same thing, and they don't want to do it, but it's like by default. So try to be sensitive and find out whether or not, if people have a particular skill that you can use and they want to use it, that's fine. Other people may want to do this thing for your organization as an avocation. But try to understand that these are gifts and skills that are of God, and that we are interested in skills in ministry, not just in church membership. I also think that there's a hidden thing underneath here that we need to make sure that we're aware of. And I don't know how the tension is in your particular group. I can only experience what it is in about 300 other faith groups that I know of. The task that we were in, the things we're about, the criticality of the type of people we're dealing with, I really don't have time to continue to be sectarian and continue to look for all of my volunteers inside my particular faith group. If you had the luxury to do that, and you all have got all the volunteers you could possibly use in meeting every task from within your own faith or your own denomination, great. Okay. This is time to bury those things, and this is time when we need to look at the entire Christian community. Recruit only for those available tasks. Look to those gifts. I've got a handout over here, Beverly, the one about the one-on-one, the job description, because I think this is a critical issue, and we keep hearing it, and for some reason we don't follow it. It is absolutely essential that you develop job descriptions for the roles that you have. Job descriptions solve a lot of problems. They make sure, they verify what you need. They are an official sort of thing. It's good if you're going to volunteer for an agency to understand precisely what's expected of you. It eliminates some of those false expectations. And so what I'm passing out here is kind of a model job description. There's nothing great and secret that we created that's not been done. You can get it in a number of books, a number of issues on volunteerism, and it is important, though, that you understand the nature of a job description. Let me have one of those, if you will. We see, if I were really sharp on my outline, I would have had you out doing that a little ahead of time. I missed the cue on that one. I would have had the cue a little higher up. On this job description, we give the title. We also talk about major objectives. Now, we talked today, you had a very good explanation of objectives and goals, about taking a mission statement, as our friend Noah talked about, taking a mission statement and then deciding from that how do you put things in actions. He called them values, and we can talk about developing objectives and goals out of those things. And then you talk about the major responsibility that the person is going to have, qualifications, if there's any training, and then it's very important to have time and place and those kinds of things. How it's going to be supervised, how one's going to be evaluated, and I really think that the bottom of that's awfully important. when you have a job description, have people sign off on it. You sign off on it as the program coordinator, as the supervisor of that particular task, and you also have that person sign it. And then I always Xerox copies, and I keep a copy in the file. Oh, we did have an extra, thank you. And we make it very, very official. Again, that is just something extra, add that extra little bit of prestige is probably the right word. I feel good about doing this thing, and someone has taken the time to make this thing to fit these qualifications. I have a title, I have an understanding of what I'm supposed to do, and this is on file officially. And later on, then it becomes the instrument to guide someone. When we have a situation where there's a problem, or where we
Taylor, can
are...
you come to the front office, please? Mrs. Taylor, come to the front office, please.
Later on, if we have a difficulty with getting that job accomplished, or if there's some fuzziness, we go to the job description. That becomes our plan there. Very important we do this. Otherwise, we're all got a vague notion of what's going on, and there's nothing worse than having a vague expectation or a vague understanding of what the agency expects you to do, and then having your supervisor frustrated because you're not doing what they expect. And the problem is you all had a real fuzzy idea to start with. It was never down on paper, and so no wonder we're confused.
What would you say about having the volunteers sign a contract?
I think contracts are good. The trick on a contract is that you have got to make it not too long to where it becomes in perpetuity, you know. And to have, when you have a contract, I think it's really important that you have a built-in review process. That in 6 months from now, we're going to analyze this thing and then kind of make a new covenant. I like to use the word covenant rather than contract. I don't know if that makes it, but I like the sense of the scripture of what a covenant means, and I like for us to kind of covenant together. Yeah. Okay, yeah, and if you're talking about someone specifically in a government institution, you may need to use that terminology. I would suggest that you make those covenants, and that's why we sign this job description. That's the equivalent of a contract or a covenant, I feel, even though we don't say it in those terms. When we're all signing off on it, we have agreed to that premise. And I do think that's essential. I think it's also important that you try to think about target communities within the Christian community. And sometimes we think about all Christians. Well, all Christians are out there, and we've got this lump, this category we call Christians. But we don't appeal to all those people in the same ways. All these people have different interests. They have different, because of different factors in their life, they fall into different categories. And I've listed a few of them there for you. I think, first off, that if you were talking about as a clergyman yourself or a clergywoman, if you are talking about ministers, you need to be involved in some sort of associations with those people. Ministerial associations I mentioned. Now sometimes those are the kinds of things you don't want to be involved in for whatever reason. I'm in what I consider to be a perfect kind of group, because we simply meet for breakfast once a month. There's no agenda. We don't do any social action. We don't have any kind of mutual commitment. It's purely a fellowship group. But having rapport with that 25 or plus other ministers who are in the same area of town as this particular one is, I think is important. And I think that your access is going to often come through these people. So I think you need to be aware of that, and you ought to consider that as kind of a target community. There are some tasks for which you want ordained clergy. There are also, of course, just entree to those particular people's flocks that I think is important. And again, we have the type of ministry which can cut beyond denominational barriers and can cut into those sorts of things. We can use those things. I mean, the particular group of people under which I'm ordained are probably about as a tight little sect in the world. But, you know, they always have had a great deal of tolerance for me, and I don't flaunt, but I mean, you know, they understand the necessity of my work with all faith groups. They continue to support our organization. We have a nonprofit corporation which is dependent. We are a mission project. I have no money unless these people continue supporting us, and no lever on them to keep them. And they continue supporting because they implicitly bought into the fact that in the prison work, we have to do this thing interdenominationally. And I think all those people will do that. And the ministers in these other congregations, you will have access to those people if you understand that as a target group and work it. Singles, I think, within church groups are groups of people who you may want to target. They are people who sometimes, not always, but sometimes are not being ministered to in any good way in their church, in the sense that, you know, most churches, we got one single person here, which time over. In most churches, it's kind of like a joint membership. There aren't any classes or any things you go to that, you know, that don't kind of assume that you're supposed to be married. And if you're a certain age, they're concerned about you till they get you married off sometimes too. Churches have got large groups of talented people, people who want to share some things, who really don't have networks sometimes, who don't have those social things, and sometimes their life is caught up in their work and whatever, and I think that they also have a great deal of flexibility without the family contacts or without the commitments there. I think singles are a group you really need to think about, and you ought to try to work as a target group. I think college students, these are people who are learning things in an academic environment. And they really are hungry, believe me, I spent a lot of time in the academic community. They are hungry for the ability to put their academic knowledge into some kind of practical sense, because we got a lot of ivory tower stuff up there that doesn't seem to break down into the real world. Also, many times there are, if not required, at least potential for internships, for what we call practicums, for people to get experience in agencies out in the world. This is usually something that the academic community has kind of built in, but they don't really know how to handle it real well. And so I think that there's a tremendous audience there of people in this area who happen to be, again, from the Christian community and who can commit to those philosophical structures we laid out at the beginning. Professionals, and I mean by that, people who have a particular skill or expertise. An attorney, an accountant, someone like that. You need in your organization to be tapped into people, and they also have professional organizations of which they're a part. It might be an educator. You know, if I were going to look to try to find someone to train some people, I would certainly want to try. I didn't have that personal organization, and I needed a volunteer or a training component. I would certainly try to find someone in the Christian community who had an education background, who I knew would be able to sit down and look at a body of material and try to break it up and find ways to share that with other people. Retired people are tremendous resources. People who have developed skills over years, who've got a good sense of what's going on in the world, and who many times don't want to be retired. And they have great skills you and I need to work with them. Some of them have associations and organizations too that you might network. Organizations, there's just a wide range, and I don't know exactly what all they would have here, but there are service clubs. There are sometimes a fraternal organization. There are groups of people who have networks. I just think you ought to break down that catch-all phrase of the Christian community and understand the pockets out there in that community. And you obviously in your particular community will know better than I can. These are just broad sorts of categories. Any grouping that you can find. I really believe that James 1:22, when he says that one should be a doer of the word, is talking certainly about how we put our faith into practice. I really believe that that can apply to how we put our particular skill and gift. God gives us certain gifts, and then we develop certain skills, and that's kind of what I think that we need to do in terms of putting doing into our action. Find ways, and people, again, go back to that point I made earlier, maybe say it a little different way. What a beautiful ministry it is to be able to motivate someone who has been intellectually or cognitively committed to something, Jesus, Christianity, to be able to share with them ways in which they can put that into practice in life, real life situations, and use skills and find ways to develop their talents and do that is a tremendous ministry in and of itself. And I would hope that you would be really willing to make that a part of your ministry. And then I mentioned a personal interview, and I think a personal interview is absolutely critical. I think that you need to commit to that kind of thing. And in that interview, you need to get some things straight. I think you need to be able to understand that philosophically you are in agreement. I think you need to find out some very basic things there in terms of their time commitment, in terms of what their expectations are. What do they think they want? It's really important to ask the question, what is it that you want to accomplish by volunteering with us or getting involved? What are you looking for? Sometimes some very revealing answers come from that. And you can discern some things there. And it's important that you ask that question. And in any interview, make sure that you are looking for all these things we've been talking about. And don't be afraid to, in nice ways, tell people that we'll call them. Don't be afraid to say no and not use people. The only thing worse than not having any volunteers is having volunteers that you shouldn't have because you didn't know how to say no. Or you thought that they were such good people and they had the right reasons, so we got to use them somewhere. Don't put your ministry on the line for those kinds of things, you know. We can't afford it. We really can't. And we're dealing with people that will use those people in some very negative ways. One thing I did put down on the interview that came to me as I was, or on this paper, it came to me as I was kind of reviewing this, was that you also need to be very careful in terms of developing these target communities and working through things. Make sure that you work through local pastors, established authorities, whoever the proper channels are. Don't raid without their permission, okay? You need to go through the proper kind of channels. What happens when you begin to develop in one particular location is that begins to multiply. Christ usually, really always multiplies the fish and the loaves. Every time I have ever gotten, and I am in a position of having to get direct solicitation of money from churches. Every time I have gotten significant money from a congregation, it's never been because I was in there and I was so eloquent. That might have started it. But when the money came, it was because somehow I managed to attract someone in that church who got involved in the ministry, who got turned on to it, and who wound up as a result going back and communicating to other people. I got other volunteers and I got money from those churches. And if I didn't get money in the monthly budget, I had access. When I really had a critical issue, I was able to go to that minister or go to someone and say, here's a problem we have, can you help us? And they always help. The key to getting involvement is to finding just one person in one of those groups. And you ought to set that kind of realistic goal. You don't need masses, but you get one person, treat that person right, and they will recruit other people and they will open access to you for all of these other people. Now that we get people though, I really think that, I don't know what percentage we say, half and half or whatever, but it's awfully critical that after you and I are able to generate a few volunteers, we know how to maintain the volunteers we've got. That's another big problem I have had. I won't begin to try to tell you I've done it successfully, but I have learned a few things, I think. And first off, in order to understand this, I think we need to have some internal sorts of organizational commitments. We have a thing there, a Yoke Fellows handout. And I don't even know if I need to hand this out, but it's the thing that I typically hand out at this particular point. You probably have, again, very well-defined sort of internal statements from the Salvation Army, from your particular branch of correctional services, or from whatever. But I think that you need to have some internal guidelines that go to the volunteer as well. It's not just enough that you and I know how we're going to handle volunteers, but we ought to have some kind of a handout or some kind of a piece of paper that volunteers will understand kind of what's expected of them and kind of what they're adhering to. If you belong to a football team, an athletic team, you have a school fight song. You have some kind of rallying point. You have school colors. You have some kinds of things that you all adhere to. It's a part of the esprit de corps that we build up or whatever. The same thing in your organization. I think you need some kind of document which says, and this particular one is based on Yoke Fellows, which have a pretty thriving prison ministry in some areas of the states, and talks about the marks of Yoke Fellows. They are the reality of commitment, acceptance of discipline, bearing of witness, etc., etc. And talk about commitment, about discipline, witness, ministry, fellowship. These marks make it clear that the people involved in this fellowship have joined together voluntarily for the promotion of a Bible Christianity. This kind of thing, I think, is really good for you. Good for that volunteer to see on paper. Did we run short up here? We need a couple more, I'm afraid, Reverend. Is really good for someone to try to put in front of them, and maybe even they hang that on the wall if you really want to do that in some way, in that way. An internal document, and this should be tied to your mission statement. And again, we talked a lot about mission statement this morning, so I don't need to go into that. But it needs to be tied to your mission statement, and it's a broad theoretical kind of basis of what it is that a volunteer is in your organization and how they are mutually joined together in commitment. And then you need to set up some realistic, achievable tasks. Please be careful about the nature of the task that you put before someone. It's got to be something they can get completed. It's got to be short enough, of a short enough time duration, or it's got to be objective enough that you know how to complete it. And you need to have some way of evaluating that. Now, on the desk out there again, and Gene, I'm not sure where this came from, but out on your desk, I read the first night I was here, a paper, a document somehow generated through the Correctional Services about program evaluations. Very good, and performance evaluation, I'm sorry. I'm not sure where that came from, but this is really a very good little document, 4 or 5 sheets, which talks about him evaluating employees. And I think it's good for evaluation of anything, and I think you ought to really read that report and talk about ways in which you can get accountability from your volunteers. The methods of accountability, the importance of feedback. I'm going to pass out that 101 ways also, Beverly. I've got it really busy today. The ways in which we evaluate people are important. If I have a goal and it's achievable, I still have got to have built into that some way that I'm going to evaluate that employee, in this case that volunteer. And again, evaluations, and one of the things that I liked about that paper that it stressed so much was that people expect evaluations. We are accustomed to being evaluated, and evaluation is not a sign that we're doing something wrong. It's not some kind of a criticism. An evaluation is simply a sharing of how you have accomplished a certain thing, what we continue to need to do, and it's just a recognition of where we are. So I think it's important for you to have some sort of evaluation built in and feedback. Also, and what's being passed out right now is a little thing that I copied, and it's just called 101 Ways to Recognize Volunteers. Folks, we get volunteers to do things. They work hard in our organizations. We just keep dumping things on them, and since they're not the real live people, they're not the staff people, they don't seem to get rewards, they're not up front, and you really need to work hard at giving some kind of recognition. And this little thing just lists a whole lot of creative little ways, and you can think of other creative ways. In our organization, every single year, we have a volunteer appreciation banquet in which we bring all of our volunteers in. We give them a nice meal, we serve them, they don't have to do anything for it. And then we have some certificates. Everyone gets something, some reward formally in front of everyone. And we give some special awards for extra service, Volunteer of the Year awards, a few of those, whatever the conditions merit. However it is you set it up, you really need to make sure that you don't forget to recognize your people. You will lose people if you don't adhere to these kinds of things. If you don't give them some kinds of guidelines, if they don't find achievable and realistic kinds of tasks that's within their skill range, if they don't have an evaluation and some kind of feedback and some accountability, and if they never get a reward, then you are continually going to be out generating volunteers and continue to lose them out the back door. Retention is very important. And probably the most important part of that is number B there under maintenance, volunteer involvement. You need to consider a volunteer as an unpaid staff person. They need to have equal status in the organization. They ought to be just as if they were any other paid employee. The statement of commitment would work. We've talked a little bit about mission statements. You need to have that contracts or whatever. Immediate assignment. Make sure that you don't get a volunteer recruited and then it takes you several weeks to get back in touch with them to get them assigned. As with anything, the height of our interest and enthusiasm is right then. The problem with many people in the Christian life is that they come to the altar, they come to Christ, and then we kind of leave them alone and they never grow after that. The problem in the same way with volunteers, the key point and the key point with any offender. The first time that person's locked up, that's the height of their trauma, that's a key point. When you first get to volunteer organization, you've got to get them back, you've got to get them involved active immediately. If that thing drags out, you lose them. And they have got to be able to participate in developing the agendas of the organization. They have got to feel a part of the team. Every single volunteer expert in the world continues to say the same thing. You've got to have your people feel like they're not just slaves. They're not peons, somebody which you say, here's what we got to have done today, blah, blah, blah. And every once in a while they get around you, they want to know more about the organization. And so you give them 3 or 4 words, get back to work. And you find them scurrying around. I found them hunting around on my shelves, reading back issues of my newsletter, trying to find out things about the organization because they loved it, but I wasn't giving them anything. I never, I had trouble letting people be a part of that. You need to let these people be a part of the agenda. They ought to be included in policy sorts of meetings. Now, there are different levels of that. We've got executive committees and staff meetings or whatever, but at some point they need to be a part of the organization and a part of the team. If they are as important a cog as we always say they are, they have to do that. I hope as we're running through this thing, you might be finding some things, you might be saying, hey, wait a minute, my volunteer job that I do, I don't get some of those things either. Maybe we'll find some ways to sharpen up our own organization too. People have got to be allowed to be creative also. Let your volunteers, when they participate, they might come up with a good idea. They might come up with some reasons why the way you and I and all the wonderful creative powers that be didn't think through quite enough. Allow them and allow your programs to be flexible enough to not be so rigid that you couldn't adapt something and allow that volunteer to suggest something, to try something new, or to allow an offshoot of that thing. You have these mission statements, you have these things, but part 6, part 9, or part 10, whatever it is, in every organization ought to be continual review. And let's go back and rethink this thing in several times. Are we still, and this is where this kind of thing comes in. Allow the people in the organization to contribute things to be creative as well. Now, where do we run into difficulties and problems? Well, one of the things we have sometimes where we lose volunteers is we have too many goals. Again, we mentioned that earlier today in our first session, our plenary this morning, that you only need a few that you can hang on to, you can all get in touch with, and you can memorize. Sometimes there's more to be accomplished, and everything's so broad and vague, and you've got so many things you're trying to do, particularly in our business, because we can look at this dealing with offenders, and good grief, we can find everything in the world that needs to be done, but we need to try to narrow that down to those 2 or 3 or 5 key goals that we want to try to accomplish. And sometimes we lose volunteers, we can't retain volunteers because they're not aware of the goals or they're too broad. Now also, be careful though of what I call a goal dumper. If you're going to allow people to be creative and allow people to contribute to the group and allow them to be involved, make sure that you don't get manipulated by goal dumpers who want to dump their goals and their agendas on your organization. Listen to people. My wife can attest to a battle that I'm dealing with, and it's been an ongoing running gun battle with a staff person who's trying to dump goals, and I'm acutely aware of how this happens in subtle ways in which my behavior And our organization has gotten fuzzy on some things because I've allowed a particular person to set agendas, and I've been kind of lost sight of some mission goals over here. And I think you need to make sure that while we let this thing open up, you keep yourself aware of what the mission statements are. Inadequate contract. We already mentioned the contract there, and I think that it's either implicit or explicit contract sometimes. Sometimes it's because we don't really get a handle on what people's skills are. Sometimes it's because we don't have the right job description. Sometimes we don't understand what their backgrounds are. And what happens is that we kind of get a haphazard discovery of what these people are, and we never make an adequate kind of commitment and contract. That's one of the problems that come up with goals. A lack of accountability. They're not paid, so the trap we fall into sometimes is we don't make them accountable. I mean, we don't have the right to do that because, after all, they're donating their time, right? No. If they're, and see again, if that's all they ever do, then maybe you're trapped into that. But if you allow them to be a part of the organization, to help with some agendas, to be creative, to be a part of that, we all mutually commit to the same things, we have contractual sorts of arrangements we're involved in, we also have the right to demand, and I use the word demand, in the legitimate sense of the word, we have the right to expect certain kinds of behaviors back and certain accountability. We've got to pass out, and I don't need to talk about it, just come around to you. There's a little sheet here that we use. I gave you a one-on-one job description, and I'll show you a progress report that we have each of these people fill out on that particular statement, just so you can get an idea of one of the measures of accountability that we build into that particular program of visiting inmates. It's just a method that we verify how many times they've been visiting, what kinds of things come up, what kinds of problems. It provides a basis for our evaluation. No rewards and recognitions, we've already talked about, really. In the absence of any partnership. And if you'll notice very quickly that these problems I've identified really spring out of an inadequate job in the volunteer involvements. The B really feeds into the C very quickly. The absence of a partnership means that people really don't have genuine input sometimes. There's poor communication between staff. And then there are unilateral decisions made. Unilateral decisions made by you and I or whoever's in charge of the organization to make sure that we do it our way and these people aren't a part of that. All those things continue to cause problems, will continue to cause you to lose volunteers, to be unable to retain volunteers, and to set a very unhealthy sort of atmosphere. And that begins to kind of grow like mold in the lab or something, that when volunteers come into your organization, when you've got those problems and those things internally not going on, and you're not able to retain volunteers, that gets communicated very rapidly to your new incoming volunteers. And there's that kind of unhealthiness around, and so it's never a good place to be a volunteer because we're always experiencing those sorts of things. We're running fairly short on time. I've talked about training in the last thing, and I would just briefly say to you that you need to continue your training in the sense that you have to train people about your particular agency. You also you may have to give people training for a specific task that they're doing in your agency. There are some things about what it is you're doing, whether it be a volunteer probation officer, someone working in bail, or whether or not it be someone going to court hearings or whatever. Your training, you need to commit it to an ongoing, continual process. You don't assume that one is totally trained. It has to be something going on in our organization. We have what we've done now is set up a quarterly training that every volunteer is invited to. We have initial orientation sorts of things. We have particular training for the one-on-one job description I passed around, that one-on-one program. And then 4 times a year, we'll have a training session, 4 hours. And all volunteers are required to make 2 of those 4 sessions during the year. And what we do is do topical sorts of things that all of us would kind of genuinely be interested in. The lady that's coming up and training for us on the 14th is a lady whose skills particularly deal with getting in touch with yourself and why we do some of the things we do in terms of our interpersonal relationship and those kinds of things we think will be helpful to our volunteers in general. We will have someone, at one time, we'll have a panel of ex-offenders who will come in. That's the kind of thing that, regardless of where our volunteers are working, that's the kind of thing that can be helpful to them. So that kind of ongoing. I think you also need to have some part of your training component is just simply a support group. You know, when we deal with things out there, we get cut off. It's a tough business. A lot of us are dried out, and our volunteers, same things happen, and we need to have within our organization some kind of support. If you got people visiting and dealing with inmates on a personal basis, they need to be able to sit down and say to each other, you know, this is what happened to me, and this has really got to me, and it's caused me to think about this and that. Somebody else says, yeah, you know, I can understand that experience, this has happened. You have an ongoing support group. I think it's really critical to keep your volunteers healthy. Remember liabilities, and I don't know, again, what the particular legal issues are. You know those things about Canada better than I do and about your particular agency. I just think it's sufficient to say this. Any volunteer who walks into any institution or who deals with any offender or ex-offender or family or whatever, through your organization, you need to be and feel and understand that you are liable in some way. Legally, you might be liable for some things that happen in some sort of civil matter. You certainly are liable in an ethical sense for what they do and how they carry out the mission. For you to not train, for you to just give people an insufficient little smattering of something, is for you to abdicate that responsibility and to say that that is meaningless to me. I find that position absolutely untenable. You've got to concern yourself enough with what people do in these programs to train them. You train them about all kinds of specifics, but one of the things that I think we fail most often in volunteer organizations is we don't train our volunteers about the system and about offender behavior and about profiles of the people and the way we ought to work in there. Traditionally, most church groups train people in the message, in how to communicate the gospel, for instance. Or we train them in the particular program, how to do this specific program that we have in this particular setting. We seldom give people what I would call contextual training in terms of understanding the dynamics of working with offenders, the dynamics of institutions. Most of us learn that stuff by osmosis after we get into prison. And sometimes we learn it in ways that I wish I hadn't learned it. It would have been easier had I learned it elsewhere. That particularly, again, is something dear to my heart because that's predominantly what I wind up doing through the Atlanta Chaplaincy Training School. We have summer school sessions where we bring people down for 2 weeks and we give them some criminology courses, some real crash courses, system sorts of things, offender behavior. We go out in different segments of the correctional system and they stand a correctional officer watch and they have seminars with wardens and all these people try to understand the context. We do one-day seminars where we do about a 7-hour seminar, and that's all we do is train volunteers on that kind of contextual sorts of thing, all from the religious perspective, but all from that kind of training. Again, I want to show you just one little piece of a videotape because it's on that particular subject. This is on the context. There's 8 different things on that page that vary from hard rules to this kind of more subtle things. Those are the kind of things we need to be sharing with our volunteers, I think, and we need to be developing our training around that sort of thing. I think that there are some resources available for you, and I've listed on the back of your last sheet here 3 particular agencies. One of them, the Center for Creative Community, Ivan Shire, is kind of the grandfather of volunteerism in North America, I guess. He's made a real science of it. They published books. They've got all sorts of resources there at that center in terms of dealing with volunteers. Also, an association which many of you or some of you are already involved with, and which I've met some of you, National Association for Volunteers in Criminal Justice, is an agency which there is some literature about, and I believe that Gene is the Canadian representative for that organization. Is that right? NAVCJ in action. I don't know if there's anything left back on that display table again. This is an organization which I would encourage you to become a part of. She also has some books. Do we have this is something that she is, and I have read it as well, and I think it's a good book for you, and I think you have some available if people would like to purchase these through Gene. This is one of the books, for instance, that we have been able to generate through this kind of agency. I believe that Marlene was at the conference, one of those two in Syracuse, or one of the two of them, and these are the kinds of resources that are available. If you're interested maybe in that particular book, you can see Gene about that. There's also Judge Keith Meanhouse, another organization called Volunteers in Prevention, Probation, Prison. He is a person who started about 15 years ago as a municipal court judge in Detroit and developed a model of involvement with courts and has gone on since then to really develop that model. There's an organization that I also think would be helpful. One of the things about VIP, if you will write them, you don't have to join them in membership dues, but if you want to be on their mailing list, if you simply write them at VIP, about 4 or 5 times a year, they publish. It's not a fancy publishing. It's mimeograph things to go in together, which describe model programs all over North America. Just a plain thing for you to read. They have an inexpensive conference. NABCJ has a conference every year. It's going to be in Milwaukee in the spring. VIP is going to be in Columbus, Ohio in June. I would encourage you to be involved in some of those organizations to begin to get some of those resource materials and network together. We are running fairly close on time, but I would love to entertain any particular questions, and I obviously, in a thing of this length, I've developed my agenda, and I may have missed your agenda. So if you have some questions about some things or want to share some things with the group, please. Yes.
One question. You mentioned that you have 4 quarterly training sessions and every volunteer is expected to attend 2. Do they know at the beginning of the year what the basic subject of each one will be?
No, we're not. At this point, we're not computing quite that far ahead of time. They usually, we get those things out about a month ahead of time for them to make that choice.
I just thought they might have to select the one or two.
We're working back that. You're right. I need to work backwards that way, and I haven't gotten back that far yet. We have an orientation session at every